The Duke of Ashworth stood over his sleeping wife, with a pair of silver scissors in his hand. It was past midnight. The fire had burned down to embers, and the only light in the room came from the candle he carried, a small, trembling flame that threw his shadow long across the bed, across the woman who had done nothing wrong, across the thick chestnut braid that lay over her shoulder like a rope of silk, reaching all the way down to her waist. He looked at that braid for a long moment. And then he cut it. One clean stroke. That was all it took. 23 years of a woman's life, severed in a single second by a man who had promised, before God and all of London, to love and to cherish her. He wanted to break her. That was the truth of it. He wanted to walk into breakfast the next morning and see her red-eyed and ruined, weeping into her tea, small and humble, and finally, beneath him, where he believed a merchant's daughter belonged. But here is what the Duke of Ashworth did not know. His wife was awake. She had been awake from the moment his hand touched the door. She had heard his boots on the carpet. She had felt the candlelight through her closed eyelids, felt the mattress shift as he leaned over her, heard the soft, terrible whisper of the scissors sliding open. And she had not moved, not a breath, not a flutter of her lashes. Because in that moment, in that dark, silent, unforgivable moment, Marian, Duchess of Ashworth, made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. She decided she would not give him her tears. Not that night, not ever again. To understand how a marriage comes to a midnight like that one, we must go back 3 months, to a wedding that had nothing to do with love. Marian Whitlock was the only daughter of Thomas Whitlock, a merchant who had started life carrying crates on the docks of Bristol and ended it owning half the ships in the harbor. He was rich, richer than many lords if the truth were told, but in the eyes of London society, money earned by honest work was worth less than money inherited by idle men. The Whitlocks had fortune. What they did not have was a name. And Julian, the 9th Duke of Ashworth, had nothing but a name. Oh, he had the estate Ashworth Hall with its 100 rooms and its famous rose gardens. He had the paintings and the silver and the ancient family crest carved above the door. But behind those tall iron gates, the truth was rotting quietly, the way truth always does. Debts. Enormous debts, piled up over years, pressing down on the dukedom like a stone on a drowning man's chest. So a bargain was struck, the way such bargains were struck in those days, in a lawyer's office, over papers and signatures, with neither the bride nor the groom asked what their hearts might want. Thomas Whitlock's fortune would save the Ashworth name, and the Ashworth name would lift the Whitlock family at last into the world that had always looked down on them. Marian wore her mother's pearl earrings to the wedding. Her mother had died when Marian was 14, and those earrings, and the long chestnut hair her mother used to brush every evening, 100 strokes by candlelight, humming softly all the while, were nearly all she had left of her. "Your hair is your crown, my darling," her mother used to say. "No duchess in England has finer." Her mother could not have known, saying those gentle words to a little girl, that one day a real duchess's crown would come, and that a man would try to use it to destroy her. Julian did not smile at the wedding. He did not look at his bride during the vows. When the moment came to take her hand, he held it the way a man holds something he has been forced to pick up off the street briefly and with distaste. Marian stood beside him in white silk, 18 inches of veil and a heart full of foolish, stubborn hope, and told herself that coldness could thaw, that perhaps in time he would see her. He saw her all right. He saw her the way a proud, drowning man sees the rope that saved him, with hatred, because he could not forgive her for being necessary. The 3 months that followed were a quiet education in cruelty. Nothing anyone could point to, nothing the servants could report. Julian was far too clever for that. It was the empty chair at dinner night after night while she ate alone at a table set for 40. It was the way he introduced her at gatherings. "My wife," said flatly, with a small pause before the word wife, as though the sentence tasted of vinegar. It was the door of his study closed. The invitations declined on her behalf without her knowledge. The way he looked through her in the corridors of that enormous, echoing house, as if she were a servant. No less than a servant. Servants, at least, he acknowledged. Marian bore it. She wrote cheerful letters to her father that were full of lies. She learned the names of every servant in the house, because someone ought to know them. She walked the rose gardens alone. And then came the night of the Pemberton Ball, the night everything broke. It was the first great event of the season, and for once, Julian could not leave his wife at home. Even he understood that a missing duchess would set tongues wagging. So Marian came. She wore blue silk and her mother's pearls, and her chestnut hair swept up in a crown of braids that caught the candlelight like polished wood. She had not meant to shine. That was the bitter joke of it all. She had only meant to survive the evening. But the old Countess of Marlowe, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, drew Marian into conversation, and discovered, to her delight, that the new Duchess of Ashworth had read every book in her father's library and could speak about trade, about music, about the world beyond ballrooms, with a wit that most fine-bred ladies had never been permitted to develop. Within an hour, half the room had drifted toward her corner. There was laughter, real laughter, warm and easy, circling around Marian like light. And across the ballroom stood Julian, Duke of Ashworth, holding a glass of wine he was not drinking, watching London fall in love with the wife he had spent 3 months teaching himself to despise. A gentleman beside him, young Lord Farley, who meant no harm at all, clapped him on the shoulder, and said the words that would echo in Julian's ears the whole silent carriage ride home. "Good heavens, Ashworth, the merchant's daughter outshines the lot of us. Whatever did you do to deserve her? Whatever did you do to deserve her?" Julian said nothing on the journey back to Ashworth Hall. He stared out the carriage window into the dark, and Marian, sitting across from him with her hands folded in her lap, watched his jaw tighten and felt something cold settle into her stomach. She had seen her husband indifferent. She had seen him contemptuous. She had never seen him like this. That night she brushed out her hair as she always did, 100 strokes, the way her mother taught her, and went to bed in the Duchess's chamber alone, as she had every night of her marriage. Outside, the wind moved through the rose gardens. Somewhere below, a clock struck 1. And down the corridor in his study, Julian sat with a bottle of brandy that his cousin Reginald had so thoughtfully sent up. "You seem troubled tonight, cousin. This will help." And drank and brooded, and felt the old family darkness rise in him like water in a flooding cellar. Every glass made her laughter louder in his memory. Every glass made the ballroom's admiration sound more like mockery. The merchant's daughter outshines the lot of us. She had humiliated him. That was how he chose to see it. Not that she had been kind and clever and lovely and that others had simply noticed. No, she had done it to him. On purpose. His father's voice, dead these 10 years, seemed to speak from the walls of that study, saying the words Julian had grown up hearing. "A woman's pride is a weed, boy. You cut it before it spreads." He rose. He took the silver scissors from the desk drawer. And he walked, with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who has convinced himself that cruelty is justice, down the long, dark corridor to his wife's room. You already know what happened next. The candle, the shadow, the single stroke of the blades. But you do not yet know the strangest part. When it was done, when the long braid hung from his fist like something lifeless, like a hunting trophy, Julian stood there in the darkness, waiting to feel victorious. He felt nothing of the kind. He felt, for one confusing moment, almost sick. And then he did something he could not have explained to anyone, least of all himself. Instead of throwing the braid into the fire, which had been his plan, instead of leaving it on her pillow for her to find, which had been his darker plan, he carried it back to his study, opened the bottom drawer of his desk, and laid it inside. Gently, almost carefully. Then he locked the drawer, finished the brandy, and told himself he had won. In her bed in the darkness, Marion finally opened her eyes. She lay still for a long time, staring at the ceiling, feeling the strange lightness at her neck where the weight of her hair had been. Her mother's voice drifted through her memory. "Your hair is your crown, my darling," and for one moment, just one, her eyes burned and her throat closed and the grief rose in her like a wave that could have drowned her. She let the wave come, she let it crest. And then she let it pass, because on the other side of that wave, in the quiet that followed, Marion discovered something waiting for her that she had never expected to find. It was not despair. It felt, if anything, like a door opening. At sunrise, she rose and walked to the mirror. The woman looking back at her was almost a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, her butchered hair hanging jagged and uneven at her jaw. The old Marion, the one who had hoped and endured and made excuses for a cruel man for 3 long months, would have wept at that reflection. The woman in the mirror did not weep. She picked up her mother's silver scissors, her own pair, from her dressing table, and with steady hands she began to trim the ragged ends even. Snip by snip, calm as a Sunday morning. When she was finished, her hair was short, shorter than any lady in England dared to wear it, curling softly just below her ears. She turned her head to one side, then the other. "Well then," she said quietly to no one at all. Something had broken in the night. Julian was right about that much, but it was not his wife. It was the last thread of hope holding her back, and now that it was gone, there was nothing left to protect him from what she would become. The Duke of Ashworth had cut off her hair, believing he was cutting a woman down. He had no idea he had just sharpened her into a blade. And downstairs, in a sunlit breakfast room, a duke was waiting to enjoy his victory, while in the shadows of that same great house, a cousin named Reginald was quietly refilling a brandy bottle, smiling to himself, moving his own dark plans one step closer to the finish. Neither man had the faintest idea what was coming down those stairs to meet them. The Duke of Ashworth came down to breakfast that morning, the way other men go to the theater. He had slept badly, the brandy had seen to that, but he had risen with something almost like eagerness, and dressed with care, and now he sat at the head of the long mahogany table with his newspaper folded beside his plate, waiting for the show to begin. He knew exactly how it would go. He had imagined it all night. The door would open. His wife would appear, if she dared to appear at all, wrapped in a shawl perhaps, or hiding under one of those little lace caps that grieving women wore. Her eyes would be swollen from crying. Her voice, when she managed to speak, would tremble. She would ask him why, and he would look at her over the top of his newspaper, calm as stone, and say something cold and elegant that would put the merchant's daughter at last in her proper place. Perhaps she would run from the room in tears. Perhaps she would beg to be sent back to her father. Either way, the lesson would be learned. The weed would be cut. Order, his father's kind of order, would be restored to Ashworth Hall. The clock on the mantel struck 9. The door opened, and the Duke of Ashworth forgot how to breathe. His wife walked into the breakfast room the way a queen walks into her own throne room. Her spine was straight. Her chin was level. She wore her finest morning dress, the dove-gray silk with the pearl buttons, the one she saved for important visitors, and her mother's pearl earrings, and upon her head nothing, no cap, no shawl, no shame. Her dark hair, cut short as a boy's, was brushed into soft, gleaming waves that curled just below her ears, neat, deliberate, almost fashionable, though no fashion like it existed anywhere in England. The morning sun caught the line of her bare neck, and Julian found himself staring at that neck, at the place where the braid used to be, unable to look away and unable to explain the strange, hollow feeling opening in his chest. She did not look broken. God help him, she looked free. "Good morning, Julian," said Marian pleasantly. She had never once in 3 months of marriage called him Julian. It was always your grace, because he had never invited her to do otherwise, and she had been too hopeful, too careful, too polite to take the liberty. Now she said his Christian name as easily as if she were remarking on the weather, and every syllable of it said, "Things have changed in this house, and we both know why." She crossed to her chair. The footman, Thomas, leapt to pull it out, his young face carefully blank in the way of servants who have seen everything and must pretend to have seen nothing. And she sat, and unfolded her napkin and reached for the teapot. "Lovely morning," she said. "I believe the roses will open early this year." And she poured her tea. Her hand, Julian noticed, did not tremble at all. His did. He hid it beneath the table and sat there, this man who had rehearsed his cold triumph all night long, discovering that not one line of his script could be used. You cannot crush a woman for weeping if she will not weep. You cannot coldly answer the question why if she refuses to ask it. She had taken his cruelty, the worst thing he had ever done to another human being, and she had simply absorbed it, the way the sea absorbs a stone. Not a ripple, not a splash. Just that calm, level, unbearable surface. He cleared his throat. He rattled his newspaper. He waited for her to break. She buttered her toast. The silence stretched on 5 minutes 10, and something remarkable began to happen in that breakfast room, something neither of them named but both of them felt. The silence changed sides. It had always been his weapon, his way of shrinking her. Now, minute by minute, it was shrinking him. He found himself desperate for her to speak. He found himself, absurdly, on the verge of speaking first, of saying anything, just to prove to himself that he still commanded the room. He was saved, or so he thought, by the door. "Well, good morning, my dears." Reginald Ashworth swept into the breakfast room like sunshine, if sunshine could be oiled and combed and dressed by an expensive tailor. The Duke's cousin was 5 years older than Julian, handsome in a soft, well-fed way, with a smile that arrived a half-second before the rest of his face. He was, as he liked to tell people, devoted to the family. He had rooms in the East Wing. He had opinions about the estate. He had, above all, endless time and endless sympathy, and he spread both of them over Ashworth Hall like a man spreading nets over water. "Cousin, you look tired, that dreadful ball, no doubt, all that noise and crush." And then Reginald turned toward the Duchess and stopped, and let his mouth fall open in beautifully performed shock. "Madam, your hair." Here it comes, thought Julian with a last flicker of hope. The audience, the witness. Surely now she would color with shame, surely now the tears. Marian touched one soft, short curl, as lightly as a woman adjusting a flower, and smiled. "Do you like it?" she said. "I found I was tired of the weight. A woman carries so many heavy things, Mr. Ashworth. It is a great relief to set one of them down." She said it looking at Reginald. She meant every word of it for her husband. Julian's teacup stopped halfway to his mouth. Across the table, for just an instant, his eyes met his wife's, and what he saw there frightened him more than any weeping could have done. There was no hatred in her gaze. Hatred he could have understood. Hatred would have meant she was still fighting him, still tangled up with him, still his in some dark and backwards way. What he saw instead was worse. She was studying him, calmly, carefully, the way a physician studies a patient or a general studies a map, as if he were no longer her husband, her jailer, her wound, but simply a problem. something to be understood, measured, and in due course solved. He looked away first. At the head of his own table in the house of his fathers, the 9th Duke of Ashworth looked away first, and the footman Thomas saw it, and the housekeeper Mrs. Hobbs, entering just then with fresh toast, saw it too. By nightfall, every servant at Ashworth Hall would know that something in the order of the world had quietly, permanently shifted. "Well," said Reginald brightly into the silence. "Well, well, how very modern." And he smiled his old smile and helped himself to eggs, and if anyone had been watching him closely, but no one ever watched Reginald closely. That was his gift, and his weapon. They might have seen the smile flicker just once into something colder. Because Reginald Ashworth had spent 2 years arranging the pieces on this particular chessboard. A drowning duke, growing darker and stranger by the month. A friendless little merchant's bride, meant to wither quietly in a loveless house and produce no heir. Everything in its place, everything on schedule. And now this woman, this shopkeeper's granddaughter, was sitting at the breakfast table with her cropped hair shining, refusing to wither. That had not been part of the plan at all. From that morning on, Marian changed, though the change was quiet, and no one in the house could have said exactly what it was. She still walked the rose gardens. She still wrote her letters and did her needlework and asked Mrs. Hobbs kindly after her rheumatism. But where the old Marian had drifted through Ashworth Hall like a guest afraid of touching the furniture, the new Marian began very gently to pay attention. She listened at dinner. She read the household accounts, which no one had ever forbidden her, because no one had ever imagined she would try. She noticed things. She noticed that a house that had swallowed her father's entire fortune still could not seem to pay its bills, that the butcher sent letters, that a stableman had been let go, that Mrs. Hobbs stretched the candles and turned the sheets sides to middle like a woman managing a poor vicarage, not a great estate. Where Marian began to wonder, coldly and clearly, has all the money gone? She noticed that her husband was ill, genuinely ill, in some way she could not name. She had been too busy fearing him before to truly look at him. Now she looked with that new physician's gaze and saw the gray tinge of his skin, the headaches that came in waves and left him gripping door frames, the tremor in his hands at breakfast, the way his temper turned in an instant like milk going off. He was 31, and he moved on his bad days like a man of 60. And she noticed, filed away, in the growing ledger she kept in her mind, that his worst days always seemed to follow his quiet evenings in the study. The evenings with the brandy. The brandy that dear, devoted cousin Reginald so faithfully kept supplied. It was almost midnight, 3 days later, when the crash came. Marian was passing the study on her way from the library, a candle in her hand, when she heard it, glass shattering against a wall, and then her husband's voice, raised in a raw, ragged fury she had never heard from him before, not even on the worst nights. But it was not the fury that stopped her where she stood. It was that he sounded afraid. "My own hand, I'm telling you, I don't remember writing it. I don't remember signing," a thud like a fist on a desk. "What is happening to me, Reg? I lose hours, I lose whole evenings, Last week there are things I've done that his voice cracked, dropped, became almost a boy's voice. Am I going mad? Is that it? Is it in the blood after all? Am I becoming him? Him, his father, the 8th Duke, dead 10 years and haunting every corridor of that house still." Marian stood frozen in the dark hallway, her candle shaking, her heart doing something complicated that she refused, absolutely refused to call pity. And then she heard the other voice, Reginald's voice, low, warm, soothing as syrup. "Hush now, cousin, hush. You are tired, that is all. You are not going mad. Who would dare say such a thing? Here, sit down, let me pour you another." Through the inch-wide gap where the study door stood ajar, Marian saw it. Her husband slumped in his chair with his head in his hands, broken and shaking, and behind him, Reginald, reaching for the decanter. And as Reginald poured, with the Duke unable to see his face, only the silent woman in the dark hallway could see it. Reginald smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was not even a cruel one. It was worse than either. It was satisfied. The quiet, patient, well-fed smile of a man watching an investment mature exactly on schedule. Marian did not gasp. She did not make a sound. She pressed herself back against the cold wall, shielded her candle with her hand, and moved silently away down the corridor, her mind working faster than it had ever worked in her life. She did not yet understand what she had seen, not fully, not the how and not the why. But as she climbed the stairs to her cold room, one thought rang through her like a bell, over and over, in time with her steps. The cruelest man in this house may not be the one who cut off my hair. She reached her door. She paused, her hand on the latch. Well then, she whispered to the darkness, those same two words, the ones from the mirror. Only this time they were not a woman accepting what had been done to her. They were a woman declaring war. There is a special kind of arithmetic that only wronged women know. Marian began doing it that very night, sitting at her little writing desk with a candle and a clean sheet of paper, while the great house slept around her. At the top of the page, she wrote a single number, the sum her father had paid, on her wedding day, into the hands of the Duke of Ashworth's lawyers. It was an enormous number, a number that had made her father's own solicitor go pale, a number large enough to pay every debt the dukedom owed twice over, repair every roof, and keep Ashworth Hall in wine and candles for 30 years. Below it, she began to write what she had seen with her own eyes in 3 months as mistress of that house. The butcher's unpaid letters, the gardener's reduced from 12 to 5, the East Meadows sold off quietly last autumn, she had heard Mrs. Hobbs mention it, the good silver locked away with the second-best service on the table even when guests came, the chimneys that smoked because no sweep had been paid to climb them. She looked at the number at the top of the page. She looked at the misery below it. They did not fit together. No matter how she turned them, they did not fit. Her father had emptied his life into this marriage, his ships, his warehouses, his decades of dawn mornings on the Bristol docks, all of it poured into the ancient leaking vessel of the Ashworth name. And the vessel was still sinking, which meant one of two things. Either her husband had gambled away a fortune in secret in 3 short months, or the money had never reached the debts at all. Someone had put a hole in the bucket, somewhere between her father's hands and the dukedom's creditors, and had been draining it quietly all along. Marian set down her pen and sat very still. Then she folded the paper, held its corner to the candle flame, and watched her arithmetic burn to ash. She was her father's daughter. She knew better than to leave numbers lying about. Tomorrow she would find the real books. The trouble was that the real books lived in the study, and the study belonged to the Duke by day and, more troublingly, to Reginald by night. Dear cousin Reginald, who had made himself so indispensable with the estate's paperwork. Dear cousin Reginald, who told the Duke, with his warmest smile, that a gentleman should never strain his poor aching head over ledgers when family could carry the burden for him. No, Marian could not simply walk in and start reading. She needed a door into the house's secrets that Reginald did not guard. She found it in the person of Mrs. Hobbs. The housekeeper of Ashworth Hall was 60 years old, built like a small stone church, and had served the family for 45 of those years. She had been a scullery maid under the old Duke, and had climbed, decade by decade, to command of the household, which meant she had spent nearly half a century watching the Ashworth men, and had opinions about them that she had never once spoken aloud. She had also spent 3 months watching the new Duchess, watching her learn every servant's name, watching her eat alone at that long, cold table with her back straight, watching her come down to breakfast with her butchered hair brushed proud, when every woman in that house knew, because servants always know, exactly what had been done in the night and by whom. So when the Duchess appeared in the housekeeper's little sitting room on a Tuesday morning and asked, quite calmly, whether Mrs. Hobbs might help her understand the household accounts, the old woman looked at her for a long, silent moment. Then she got up, closed the door, and turned the key in the lock. "There are 2 sets, Your Grace," said Mrs. Hobbs. "That's the first thing you'd best know." Marian's heart began to beat very hard. 2 sets of accounts. The fine new ledgers Mr. Reginald keeps in the study, all in his lovely hand that His Grace signs whenever he's told to. The old woman's face was carefully expressionless, the face of a servant who has survived 45 years by seeing nothing. And the kitchen books, mine, every joint of beef, every candle, every wage paid or not paid in this house these 20 years. Nobody's ever asked to see mine, madam. A pause. Nobody's ever thought they mattered. And if someone compared your books to his, said Marian slowly, joint by joint, candle by candle, then someone, said Mrs. Hobbs, might learn what I can't prove and daren't say. Me being only a servant, madam, and him being family. The 2 women looked at each other across the small, neat room, the merchant's daughter and the scullery maid who had become a general, and something passed between them that needed no signature and no seal. It was the oldest alliance in the world, 2 women whom powerful men had never once thought to fear. "Mrs. Hobbs," said Marian, "I find I have a sudden passion for household management. I may need to sit with your books for some weeks, purely for my education." "Very proper, Your Grace," said Mrs. Hobbs. "I'll bring the candles myself." For 11 nights, after the house went dark, the Duchess of Ashworth sat in the housekeeper's room and did what she had watched her father do through all the winters of her childhood. She followed the money. She was good at it, better than good. Thomas Whitlock had never had a son, so he had poured his craft into his daughter instead, taught her to read a column of figures the way other girls read novels, taught her that numbers never lie but liars always leave numbers. London society thought bookkeeping beneath a lady. London society, Marian reflected grimly, somewhere past midnight on the 6th evening, had perhaps never considered what a lady with a ledger might find. What she found was theft, patient, elegant, artistic theft. It was everywhere once she knew how to look. Wages recorded in the study ledger for stablemen Mrs. Hobbs had watched be dismissed. Repairs paid for roofs, fences, drains that no workman had ever come to make. Sums sent twice to the same creditor, with the second payment vanishing on the road. And humblest of all, most invisible of all, the wine merchant's account. Case after case after case of fine French brandy, month upon month, year upon year, at prices that made Marian's eyebrows climb. All of it ordered through, received by, and supplied to the Duke's own table by his devoted cousin. 10 years of it. The bleeding had started 10 years ago. She checked the dates twice, 3 times within months of the old Duke's death. Within months of a grieving, guilt-ridden young man of 21 inheriting a coronet, a haunted house, and a warm, smiling older cousin who said, "Let me carry the burden for you." Her father's fortune had lasted 3 months in this house. 10 years of stealing had eaten it in one swallow. Marian sat back, cold to her bones, and understood at last why the Duke of Ashworth had been drowning in debt despite estates that should have made him rich. He was not a wastrel. He was not even, in this one matter, a fool. He was a asterisk host, and somewhere in the East Wing slept the parasite that had been feeding on him for a decade, so gently, so gradually, that he had mistaken the weakness for his own nature. It was on the 11th night that she found the letter. It was tucked inside the oldest of Mrs. Hobbs' books, the one from 10 years back, slipped between 2 pages as if someone had used it for a bookmark and forgotten it, or hidden it in the one place no gentleman would ever look. The paper was yellowed, the fold worn soft with age. It was not addressed. It was not signed. It was 6 lines long, written in a strange, sloping, backwards-leaning hand, and Marian read it 4 times by candlelight, her skin prickling colder with every reading. I know what happened the night the 8th Duke died. I know what the doctor was paid to write, and I know what he saw. The price of my silence is £200 the 1st of March and each quarter after. Fail once and every drawing room in London learns what the Sun did. You know I do not bluff. Burn this. What the Sun did. Marian sat frozen, the letter trembling in her fingers. The old Duke had died 10 years ago, a fall, the family said, his heart, the doctors said, and within months the bleeding of the estate had begun. She had assumed all these 11 nights that she was tracing simple greed. But this was something else. Someone 10 years ago had known a secret about that death, a secret worth £200 a quarter every quarter for 10 years, a secret about the Sun asterisk. Julian. Was this where it had started? Was her husband not merely being robbed, was he being bled by someone who held a rope around his neck? Or, her mind tilted, rearranged itself. Was the blackmail note itself part of the theft? A fiction, an invention, a lever built to pry open a frightened young man's purse and never let it close. And why had this letter, which its reader was commanded to burn, survived 10 years pressed inside a kitchen ledger that no gentleman would ever open? Unless someone had put it there, someone careful, someone who could not speak, could not accuse, could not prove, but could keep could tuck the truth away like a seed in winter ground and wait, decades if need be, for the right pair of hands to come and find it. Marian looked up, very slowly, toward the door of the housekeeper's room. But that question would keep. There was a nearer one burning her fingers. She knew this handwriting. That was the thing that made her breath come short, not the threat, not the secret, but the hand itself. That strange backward slope. That odd, crabbed little D curling in on itself like a snail. She had seen it before. Recently. Somewhere in this house, somewhere ordinary, somewhere so commonplace that her memory refused to give it up, a paper glimpsed in passing, a note, a list, something. She closed her eyes and chased it, and it slipped away like a fish in dark water. Someone in Ashworth Hall wrote in that hand, someone she had walked past, someone perhaps she spoke to every single day. The candle guttered. Far off in the great dark house, a clock struck 2, and somewhere above her, a floorboard creaked once and went silent, as if the house itself had shifted in its sleep, or as if someone somewhere was awake. Marian folded the letter with steady hands and slid it beneath the busk of her stays, flat against her heart, where no one in the world could reach it without her knowing. 10 years, she thought. You have fed on this house for 10 years, whoever you are, and no one saw you because no one who mattered was looking. She smiled then, alone in the little room, and it was not at all a gentle smile. But I am a merchant's daughter, and we always check the accounts. Every great house has one room that the servants will not enter after dark. At Ashworth Hall, it was the corner chamber at the end of the west corridor, a door of black oak that had been locked for 20 years, whose keyhole the maids dusted quickly and crossed themselves after, whose threshold even the boldest footman stepped past a little faster than he stepped anywhere else. The Blue Room, the older servants called it, in voices that dropped when they said it. It had belonged to Julian's mother, the 8th Duchess of Ashworth, and she had died behind that door at the age of 39, of what the physicians called a wasting fever and what Mrs. Hobbs, when Marian asked her directly, called something else entirely. She died of that house, madam, said the old housekeeper quietly. Some women do. It was the 12th night, the night after the letter, and the two of them stood in the housekeeper's room with a single candle between them. Marian had not slept. The blackmail letter lay hidden beneath a loose board in her chamber now, but its 6 lines had followed her through the whole long day. I know what happened the night the 8th Duke died. I know what the son did. If she was going to understand the war she had declared, she needed to understand this family, the dead as well as the living. And there was only one room in Ashworth Hall, where the dead still kept their belongings. "The blue room," Marion said. "Who has the key?" Mrs. Hobbs was silent for a moment. Then she reached into the deep pocket of her apron and brought out a ring of keys, the great ring, the one that never left her waist, and turned it slowly until she came to a small key of tarnished brass, older and darker than all its brothers. "His Grace ordered it locked the week his mother was buried," she said. "The old Duke, I mean the father, ordered her things left where they lay and the door shut on them. He didn't want her remembered, madam, not mourned, locked away like everything else in this family." She looked down at the little key. "I was to give this up to the estate agent. Somehow I never did. I've carried it 20 years. She held it out. "You kept the letter too," Marion said softly. "It was not a question. In the old ledger you put it there." The candle flame moved. Somewhere in the walls the house ticked and settled, the way old houses do, like something turning over in its sleep. "I keep things, Your Grace," said Mrs. Hobbs at last, and her face was stone and her eyes were not. "It's what a servant can do when she can't do nothing else. She keeps things, and she waits for the right hands to give them to." Marion took the key. It was cold and heavier than it looked, the way she was learning the truth always is. She went up alone past midnight when the house was blind. The lock was stiff with 20 years of silence, but it turned. The black door swung inward on a breath of cold, stale air, dust and dried lavender, and something underneath both, faint and sad, like the ghost of a perfume. And Marion stepped into a room where time had stopped on a spring morning in another age. It was all exactly as a living woman had left it. A silver hairbrush lay on the dressing table, a few dark threads still caught in its bristles. A book sat open, face down, on the arm of a chair by the cold hearth, 20 years open at the same page. An embroidery hoop with a half-finished rose. A shawl across the bed's foot, dropped as if its owner had just this moment stepped out and would return before the fire burned low. And on the dressing table, propped against the spotted mirror, a portrait in a small oval frame. A young woman with gentle, uncertain eyes and dark hair, magnificent dark hair, dressed high and proud, the kind of hair that took a maid an hour every morning. Marion raised her candle to the portrait, and her breath caught. She knew those eyes. She saw them across the breakfast table every morning in a colder, harder face. They were Julian's eyes. It took her an hour of gentle searching to find the letters. They were not hidden cleverly. A woman watched as closely as the 8th Duchess had no clever places left, but simply, desperately, beneath the false bottom of the workbasket, under the tangle of embroidery silks, tied in a bundle with a scrap of blue ribbon. 24 of them, perhaps more, all in the same graceful, fading hand, all addressed to my dearest sister Charlotte Harrogate. And not one of them ever sent. Marion sat down in the dead woman's chair, by the dead woman's cold fireplace, and began to read the letters that had never been allowed to leave this house. "My dearest Charlotte," said the first, dated some 30 years past. "You ask how I find married life. I hardly know how to answer. He is very particular. Everything must be just so. I made an error at dinner on Thursday in front of Lord B. Some small foolishness about the wine, and afterwards he did not shout. I almost wish he had shouted. He explained very quietly for above an hour what I am and what I am not. I cannot repeat it. I did not know a voice could be so quiet and do so much harm. My dearest Charlotte, he has dismissed my maid Patterson, who came with me from home. He says a duchess ought not to be sentimental about servants. I am not to have friends among them. I am not to have friends among the neighbors. They are beneath us, he says. Everyone, it seems, is beneath us, and yet I have never in my life felt so low. My dearest Charlotte, great news, I hardly dare write it. I am to have a child. Edmund is pleased. He says if it is a son he shall make a proper Ashworth of him. Char, I must confess to you a strange terror that came over me when he said it. I lay awake all night praying not for a son, though I know I ought. I prayed, let this child be nothing like its father. Is that wicked? I think I would rather have a kind child than a great one. Marian had to set the letters down for a moment then. The candle blurred. Outside, wind moved through the black rose gardens. The child came. A son, Julian. And for a few letters, a few brief years, something like light entered the dead woman's words. He has such a laugh, Charlotte, such a laugh. He laughs at rain on the window. He brought me a beetle today as though it were the crown jewels. He is gentle. Char, do you hear me? He is gentle, and I will keep him so if it costs me everything I have. And then, letter by letter, year by year, Marian read what it cost her. Edmund says I am making the boy soft. He has forbidden him the kitchen. Julian loved to sit with the cook. He has forbidden the pony until the boy stops weeping when the hounds take a fox. He watches me when I embrace him. Yesterday he said in front of the child, do you mean to raise a duke, madam, or a lapdog? And Julian, my little Julian, 6 years old, he stepped away from me, Charlotte. He looked at his father and he stepped away from my arms. I smiled as though it were nothing. It was not nothing, it was the whole world. The letters grew shorter after that, further apart, the hand less steady. And then Marian lifted the next page, and the date at its head was almost exactly 21 years ago, and by the second line, her own hand had begun to shake. Charlotte, I write this because I must tell someone or lose my mind, and there is no one, there is no one, there is only paper. 3 nights ago I disgraced him. That is his word. Lady M. complimented my hair at the assembly. You remember my hair, Char. Mother called it my dowry, and I laughed and was gay for half an hour, and people gathered, and I forgot myself. I forgot to be small. In the carriage he said nothing at all, and I knew the silence. I have learned all his silences, and this was the worst one. He came to my room while I slept, Charlotte. He cut off my hair, all of it. I woke with the scissors sound and I lay still. God forgive me, I lay still. I was too afraid to open my eyes and I felt it go. 30 years of it. Mother's 100 strokes every evening. Gone in a moment, in the dark, in my own bed, in my own home. And Charlotte, this is the part I cannot bear to write. When it was done, I heard something at the door. I opened my eyes just a little, just a blade of light. Julian was standing in the doorway in his nightshirt, 10 years old. He had seen it all. His father walked past him and put his hand on his shoulder and said, I will hear it in my grave, he said. One day you will understand. A woman's pride is a weed, boy. You cut it before it spreads. And my son looked at me lying there, and he looked at his father, and he said nothing, Charlotte. He was 10 years old and afraid, and he said nothing. And I saw the light go out of his face like a candle pinched between 2 fingers. Edmund has not broken me tonight, Char, whatever he believes. Hair grows. But I fear like death itself, that tonight he has broken my son. The letter ended there. There were only 2 more after it, short and gray, and then nothing. The 8th Duchess of Ashworth was dead within the year. Marian sat in the frozen room with the pages in her lap. And she wept, the tears she had refused her own cropped head. She gave freely to this stranger's, and she understood now why the brush still lay on the table and the book still lay open. Nobody had closed this room to forget a wife. A guilty man had sealed it, the way you seal a tomb, because he could not bear what would look back at him from inside. He was 10 years old, she thought. He stood in that doorway and watched, and 20 years later he picked up the scissors himself. For one dangerous moment, sitting in that chair, Marian felt the great wave of it, the pity, the terrible ancient machinery of it, father into son into father into son. Cruelty handed down these halls like the silver and the paintings and the name. And then she stood up and folded the letters and put the wave away from her, deliberately, the way she had put away her tears at the mirror. No asterisk, she told the portrait on the dressing table, and her voice was gentle, but it did not bend. I am sorry for your boy, madam. With all my heart I am. But your boy is 1 and 30 now. He held the scissors himself. Understanding a cruelty is not the same as pardoning it, and I will not make your mistake. I will not lie still with my eyes closed and call it love. The gentle eyes in the portrait looked back at her and said nothing, but it seemed to Marian as she rose to leave that they said nothing in a way that was almost like agreement, almost like, then do what I could not. She was at the door, key in hand, when she heard it, footsteps, soft and slow, in the corridor below. Not a maid's quick patter. A man's tread, careful, unhurried, at nearly 3 in the morning. Marian blew out her candle and stood in the dead woman's doorway in the dark, and watched through the gallery railing as a shape moved through the hall below with a chamber stick. Reginald, dressed at this hour, wide awake, walking not toward his own rooms in the east wing but toward the Duke's corridor. In one hand the candle, in the other a small dark bottle. She watched him stop outside Julian's dressing room, where the valet left the Duke's nightly tray, the biscuits, the water, and the little glass of bitter tonic that Julian had taken every evening for years, for his nerves, poor man, on doctor's orders from town. She watched Reginald glance once down the empty hall. She watched him lift the tonic glass and tip into it with the steady patience of long habit, a careful measure from the dark little bottle, 3 drops, 4, 5, and swirl it gently, and set it back precisely where it had been. Then he straightened the tray, the way a good and devoted cousin would, and went to bed. Marian stood in the doorway of the room where one duchess had died, watching the slow murder of that duchess's son, and the last piece of pity she might have owed her husband turned, in her chest, into something colder and harder and infinitely more useful. So that is your quiet little hand, cousin asterisk, she thought. 10 years of it, the books, the brandy, the bottle. Now let us see what it looks like on paper. Because Marian had remembered standing there in the dark, watching those careful, patient, backwards tilted movements. She had finally remembered where she had seen that strange, backward sloping handwriting before. The handwriting was on the tonic bottle. That was where she had seen it, that strange, backwards leaning hand with the little curled D. And the moment Marian remembered, standing in the dead duchess's doorway at 3 in the morning, she had very nearly laughed aloud at the plain, brazen nerve of it. The bottle sat on her husband's tray every night of the world. She had glanced at it a dozen times without seeing it. A small brown apothecary's bottle with a neat paper label, Dr. E. Marsh, London, for his Grace's nerves. 3 drops in water nightly. Do not exceed. Written in that same sloping, backwards hand, the hand of the blackmail letter, the hand that had written I know what the son did asterisk 10 years ago and had been bleeding this family ever since. The next morning, in the gray light of her room, Marian laid her memory of the 2 side by side and made herself be certain. She was certain. The curled D in asterisk do not exceed was the twin of the curled D in I do not bluff. The blackmailer and the good Dr. Marsh of London were the same man. And here was the thing that made her sit very still at her dressing table, cold to her fingertips. It was not Reginald's hand. She knew Reginald's writing. The whole house knew it, that smooth, showy, forward-flowing script that filled the estate ledgers, all in his lovely hand, as Mrs. Hobbs said. This backwards hand was its opposite in every way. Its deliberate opposite, Marian thought. The way a right-handed man writes when he uses his left. The way a careful man writes when he is building a second self, a doctor who prescribes, a stranger who blackmails, a man made entirely of paper, who could take the blame for everything if the day of reckoning ever came. 10 years ago, someone had invented a threat to open a frightened young duke's purse. Somewhere along the way, the The same pen had invented a doctor to quiet the Duke's nerves and to darken his mind 3 drops at a time. She could not yet prove the pen was Reginald's, but she knew one way to begin. Find out whether Dr. E. Marsh of London existed at all. And for that, and for one other reason that had been growing in her all week, quiet and bright and fierce, the Duchess of Ashworth needed to go to London. The invitation had been lying on the silver tray in the hall for a fortnight. The Countess of Marlowe's spring ball, the great opening of the season, 400 candles and everyone in attendance. Julian had left it unanswered, assuming, no doubt, that no answer was needed. His wife had not appeared in society since the Pemberton ball, since the night before the scissors. Society had noticed. Society always notices. The whispers had already begun to drift back to Ashworth Hall like smoke under a door. The new Duchess is unwell. The new Duchess is hiding. They say, my dear, that something happened. Reginald, at breakfast, was gently in favor of hiding. You are wise to keep from town, madam, he said, all warm concern, buttering his toast. The season is a cruel circus, and people can be so unkind about anything unusual. His eyes drifted delicately to her cropped hair and away. Better to wait, I always say, a year, perhaps 2, until things are grown over. Marian stirred her tea and watched him. This man she had seen tip 5 careful drops into her husband's glass, and smiled her calmest smile. How thoughtful you are, Mr. Ashworth, she said. But as it happens, I have written to Lady Marlowe this morning. We accept. The butter knife stopped. We, said Julian from the head of the table. It was the first word he had spoken. We, said Marian pleasantly. The Duke and Duchess of Ashworth. It will look very odd if we refuse, and I find I am not willing to look odd on your behalf, Julian. People might begin to imagine that something is wrong in this house. She let the sentence sit there, soft as a cat, in the middle of the breakfast table. Julian stared at her down the length of white linen. He had barely slept, the headaches again, the gray fog that swallowed his evenings, and here was this woman with her bare neck and her steady eyes, arranging his life at his own table. And the strange thing, the thing he could not have confessed to a living soul, was that some small, buried, 10-year-old part of him wanted to hand her the reins entirely and simply rest. As you wish, he heard himself say. Reginald's smile never moved, but his knuckles around the butter knife went briefly white, and Marian, buttering her own toast serenely, saw it and put it in her ledger with everything else. They said afterwards, and London said it for 30 years, that the temperature of Lady Marlowe's ballroom dropped 10 degrees when the Duchess of Ashworth was announced. She had planned it all with her dressmaker in 4 feverish days, and she had planned it like a general. No cap, no turban, no false curls, no cascade of borrowed hair pinned over the wound, which was what every whispering matron in that ballroom expected of a disgraced woman. Instead, deep green silk, cut severe and gleaming, a single strand of her mother's pearls and her dark hair short, brushed to a soft shine, dressed close to her head with one thin ribbon of gold, like a laurel on a Roman coin. She walked into that blaze of candlelight, 400 candles, 800 eyes, with her chin level and her step unhurried, and the great room did what great rooms do to a woman who is different. It went silent. The silence spread out from her like rings from a stone in water. Fans stopped. Quizzing glasses rose. Somewhere near the punch table a young lady tittered, high and nervous, and the titter ran along the walls in little flickers, gathering, swelling, a heartbeat away from becoming the laughter that would ruin her. And Julian, 3 steps behind his wife, felt the sound like ice down his spine and understood, in one blinding instant, the size of the thing she had risked. She had walked into the lion's mouth of England wearing his cruelty like a crown, and if London laughed, it would not be the Duke of Ashworth who was destroyed by what he had done in the dark. It would be her, publicly, forever. He had wanted exactly this, hadn't he? Her humiliation, her ruin. It was being served to him now on 400 candles. So no one was more astonished than Julian himself when he found that his feet had carried him forward, that his arm, stiff, clumsy, entirely without instruction from his brain, had offered itself to his wife before all the world, as a husband's arm ought. Marian looked at that offered arm, one heartbeat, two. Then she laid her gloved hand upon it, lightly, lightly, a touch that weighed nothing and cost him everything. And the Duke and Duchess of Ashworth walked down the steps together into the silence. It was the old Countess of Marlowe herself who broke it. She came sailing through the frozen crowd like a ship of the line, 70 years old, diamonds at her throat and no patience left in her anywhere. And she planted herself before Marian and raised her lorgnette and looked slowly, thoroughly, from the gold ribbon to the bare white neck, while all of London held its breath. "HMPH," said the Countess of Marlowe. And then, in a voice that carried to the last chair in the room as she meant it to, at last, a woman with the courage to stop carrying a sheep's worth of wool on her head in high summer. "My dear, you look like a queen on a coin. I have been wanting to do that for 50 years. She snapped the lorgnette shut. "You will sit by me at supper, Duchess. The rest of these creatures bore me senseless." There are moments when the whole weather of the world turns on a single old woman's word. The titters died. The fans resumed but flurried now, urgent, carrying a different message down the walls. "The Marlowe approves, the Marlowe approves." By the first quadrille, 3 young ladies had asked to be presented to the Duchess of Ashworth. By supper, a viscountess was heard telling her friend that long hair was, when one asterisk truly considered it, terribly provincial. By the end of the evening, the phrase had been coined that would fly through every drawing room, every dressmaker's, every scandal sheet in the city before the week was out. The Ashworth crop. Within the month, this is truth. As the papers of the day would tell you, half the fashionable heads in London had gone under the scissors, and mothers wrote furious letters about daughters shorn like spring lambs, and a hairdresser in Bond Street made his fortune, and the Duchess of Ashworth, the merchant's daughter, the woman a cruel man had tried to erase in the dark, could not enter a room in England without the whisper running ahead of her like fire through stubble. "That is she, that is the one, the Ashworth crop, my dear, the original." He had cut off her hair to make her nothing. He had made her immortal. Julian stood at the edge of the ballroom, a glass of untouched wine in his hand, and watched his wife hold court. She was laughing at something the old Countess had said, head back, throat bare, unafraid, and the candlelight moved on her short, bright hair, and around her the crowd leaned in the way crowds lean toward warmth in winter. And Julian felt the strange hollow ache in his chest that had been visiting him for weeks now and that he had no name for, because no one had ever taught him its name. Watching her, he thought with no warning at all, the thought simply arrived, whole, like something slipped under a door. My mother laughed like that once. At an assembly, people gathered. She was gay for half an hour. He could not remember what had happened after. That was the mercy of it. He genuinely could not remember, only the shape of a black door closing somewhere in his mind, and behind it his father's quiet voice, and a cold feeling like the flat of a blade. His head had begun to ache again, the gray fog rolling in from the edges, and his hand had begun its small tremble, and he set down the wine glass before anyone could see. "What is happening to me?" he thought, watching his wife shine in the middle distance like something already lost to him. "What have I done? What am I? Which of those questions is the one that matters?" He did not know that 40 feet above his head, in the shadows of the musician's balcony, 2 men stood close together at the rail, looking down at the same bright, laughing woman. One of them was Reginald. The other was a lean gray man in respectable black, with ink-stained fingers and the still, patient face of a person whose whole profession is other people's secrets. He had arrived late. He would leave early. No one in that ballroom would remember him. Being unmemorable was, after all, what he was paid for. "You told me she would be nothing," the gray man said, very quietly under the music. "A tradesman's chit, buried alive in the country by winter, you said." "Plans ripen differently in different weather," said Reginald. His voice was as smooth as ever. His eyes, fixed on Marion, were not smooth at all. "It changes nothing." "No," the gray man's gaze followed the Duchess as the crowd around her laughed again. "She has the Marlowe woman. By Friday she'll have the wives, and the wives have the husbands, and the husbands have the banks and the bench. And she watches that one. I've watched enough watchers to know." He paused. "The signatures were meant to be the end of it. Quiet ruin, a quiet madhouse, a quiet inheritance. There is nothing quiet about that woman, Mr. Ashworth." Below them, across the golden sea of the ballroom, Marion chose that precise moment to lift her head, some instinct, some cold breath on the neck that women who are hunted learn to feel, and her eyes swept the balconies. Both men stepped back from the rail, smooth as shadows, into the dark. "Then we are agreed," murmured Reginald, and for once the warmth was entirely gone from his voice, and what remained was 10 patient years of appetite. "That woman will ruin everything. We move faster." There was no Dr. E. Marsh in London. It took Marion 2 days to be sure of it, and she did it the way her father had taught her to do everything, quietly, on paper, twice. On the morning after the ball, while fashionable London slept off its champagne, the Duchess of Ashworth sent her maid out for a copy of the medical register, the printed directory of every physician licensed in the city, and sat with it by the window of their townhouse, running her finger down the columns. Marlowe, Marston, Marshall, Martin. No Marsh, not at the address on the tonic bottle, not at any address. There was no such doctor in London. There never had been. And when she sent a discreet note by messenger to the street named on that neat paper label, the answer came back within the hour. The address belonged to a tobacconist's shop, and the tobacconist had never heard of any Dr. Marsh, though, and here Marion's blood went cold in the spring sunlight, a gentleman's man did call quarterly to collect any letters left there in that name. Quarterly. The 1st of March, and each quarter after. A doctor made of paper, an address that was a hole in a wall, and every 3 months for 10 years, someone's man collecting the money that fear had wrung out of Ashworth Hall, the money her father's ships had died to replace. Marion closed the asterisk register and sat very still for a long while. Then she called for the carriage, and gave the coachman an address in the city that she had known by heart since childhood. The offices of Mr. Aldbury, of Aldbury and Sons, her father's solicitor for 30 years, the driest, grayest, most gloriously unimpressible man in England, who had drawn up her marriage settlement with a face like a headstone, and made even the Duke's grand lawyers sweat over the fine print. Mr. Aldbury received the Duchess of Ashworth without surprise. Nothing had surprised Mr. Aldbury since 1809, and listened to her for 1 hour without moving anything except twice, his left eyebrow. She did not tell him everything. She was her father's daughter. You do not spend all your powder on the first shot. She told him only this, that she had reason to believe the affairs of the Ashworth estate had been managed irregularly for some years, that she was gathering her proofs, and that she wished to leave with him, sealed in his strongbox, to be opened only upon her written instruction or upon any sudden misfortune befalling her, a small packet. Inside the packet, the blackmail letter, a page of her own careful notes, and a true copy made in her own hand of the label on a small brown bottle. Mr. Aldbury looked at the sealed packet, then at the Duchess. A lesser man would have asked questions. Mr. Aldbury had buried 3 generations of clients' secrets, and knew that the ones sealed by calm young women with steady hands were invariably the ones that mattered. "Any sudden misfortune," he repeated in his dust-dry voice. "Your Grace anticipates misfortune." "My father taught me to anticipate everything, Mr. Aldbury." Something happened then at the corners of the old solicitor's mouth, the nearest thing to a smile seen in those offices in a decade. "He did," said Mr. Aldbury. "I recall it fondly. It will be done as you say, madam and Duchess." She turned at the door. The old man's eyes behind their spectacles were suddenly neither dry nor gray. "Thomas Whitlock's daughter does not walk alone in this city. Whatever she may face elsewhere, you will remember that." It was the closest thing to an embrace the law of England could offer, and Marian carried it home like a warm coal all the way back through the crowded streets. She would have slept easier that night if she had known one thing more. She had been followed to the city. A lean gray man in respectable black, unmemorable as fog, had stood across the street from Aldbury and Sons for the full hour, noting the brass plate, noting the time, and had gone away before her carriage turned, to write it all in a small book for the man who paid him. They returned to Ashworth Hall on the Friday. The house felt different, she felt it from the steps, before the great door even opened. Triumph had gone home with them from London. The servants knew it all, the way servants know everything, and there were small smiles behind the bows now, and fresh flowers in her rooms that no one admitted ordering, and Mrs. Hobbs at the door with her stone face and her eyes like lit windows. The Duchess had gone to London to be destroyed and had come back a fashion. In the war between the West Wing and the East Wing, and every servant in that house knew by now that there was a war, even if no one could have said exactly what was being fought over. The West Wing had taken a city. But Marian, climbing the steps, felt something colder underneath the Triumph, and it took her until evening to name it. It was the feeling of a chessboard after your opponent has stopped talking. Reginald was charm itself at dinner. That was the tell. He praised the Marlowe ball, praised the asterisk crop asterisk, praised her lightly, warmly, not one word too many, and never once all evening tried to persuade her of anything. For 3 months he had been gently steering, gently suggesting, gently herding her toward smallness. Now the steering had stopped, the way a hand leaves the reins when the horse is already pointed at the cliff. He is not arguing with me anymore, she thought, watching him laugh at his own story over the walnuts. That means the arguing part is finished. Whatever comes next does not require my agreement. She was more right than she knew, and sooner. It was the deep middle of the night past 2 when the dream woke her. Her mother, brushing her hair, counting the strokes backwards from 100, and at asterisk 1 the scissors whisper. Marian lay in the dark with her heart drumming and her cropped head on the pillow, and knew she would not sleep again. And then she saw it, under her door at the far end of the corridor's darkness, faint as a breath, light from the study. Julian was in London still. He had stayed for a matter at his club, pale and fog-eyed, promising to follow by Sunday. The servants had been abed for hours. There was no honest reason on God's earth for a lamp in the Duke's study at 2 in the morning. Marian rose. She did not take a candle. She had learned that lesson in the West Corridor, and she went down the great staircase barefoot on the cold marble, one hand on the banister rail. Through darkness she had spent 3 months learning by heart. The study door stood ajar, an inch, perhaps 2. And through that inch, by the light of a single shaded lamp, she watched Reginald Ashworth commit the crime that would someday hang over him in a courtroom. He sat at the Duke's own desk, in the Duke's own chair, jacket off, sleeves turned back, a craftsman at his bench. Before him lay 2 documents side by side, and his eyes moved between them with a jeweler's patience. Left, right, left, right. On the left, a letter in Julian's hand. She recognized the heavy black strokes even from the door. On the right, under Reginald's slow-moving pen. Julian's hand again. She watched him write her husband's signature. watched him hold the page to the lamp, frown like an artist, set it aside, and begin again on a fresh sheet. Again the strokes, again the lamp, again the frown. Practice. Page after page after page of practice. A snowfall of discarded Julians drifting at his elbow, each one a little more perfect than the last. And at the edge of the desk, squared and waiting, lay the fair document itself, thick paper, legal margins, a red seal ready in its dish. And Marian, pressing her cheek to the door frame, straining her eyes across 15 feet of lamplight, could make out only 4 words of its heavy engrossed heading. 4 words were enough. Being of unsound mind. The floor seemed to move very slightly under her bare feet. This was the shape of it, then the whole 10-year design arriving at its final page, not just theft, not just the slow brown drops in the tonic glass. They were going to declare Julian mad. Madmen cannot manage estates. The law hands everything: lands, money, the signing of papers, the keeping asterisk of the madman himself to his nearest devoted kin. A quiet ruin, a quiet madhouse, a quiet inheritance. Reginald would not even need the Duke to die. Dying men are investigated. Madmen are simply put away, and their inconvenient young wives put away with them, or packed home to Bristol in disgrace. And who would ever listen to either of them again? Who listens to the mad and the wife of the mad? She had her answer at last, complete, monstrous, standing in the lamplight in its shirt sleeves, patiently perfecting her husband's name. And she had not one particle of proof she could use. A letter in a disguised hand, a label on a bottle, a midnight scene through a door witnessed by a wife, a asterisk merchant's daughter asterisk against the word of a gentleman of the blood. She could see the whole machine now, every gear of it, and she could touch none of it, and the fair document with its red seal was lying there finished but for the name asterisk, which meant she had days. Perhaps only. Beneath her bare heel, the 3rd floorboard from the study door, the one board in that corridor with a voice, the one she knew, the one she had stepped over 100 times and tonight, cold and barefoot and shaking, had forgotten. Creaked. The pen stopped. The lamplight tilted as the shade was lifted, and the corridor bloomed yellow around her, and there was nowhere to go and no point in going. Marian straightened her spine, chin level, step unhurried, and stood her ground in her nightgown and bare feet as the study door swung fully open. Reginald filled the doorway, lamp in hand, sleeves still rolled. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Behind him she could see the desk, see his own eyes flick once toward it, measuring what she could have seen, and when he looked back at her, something extraordinary happened to his face. The warmth did not vanish. It retired, like an actor stepping out of the light between scenes, done with the performance because the audience that mattered had seen backstage. What was left was patient and clever and as cold as the marble under her feet. "You're up late, Duchess," said Reginald softly. "It is my house, Mr. Ashworth," said Marian. "I keep what hours in it I please." "Your house." He said it gently, tasting it, and smiled, a real smile this time, which was so much worse than the old one. "Ah, but that is the very question, is it not? Whose house it is, whose house it shall be." He glanced down at her bare feet on the marble, and something flickered in his eyes that in any other man might have been admiration. Cold night for walking, and such a long way down from your room. A person could take a chill, wandering these corridors in the dark. A person could take a asterisk fall. These stairs have been unkind to Ashworths before, you know. These stairs have been unkind to Ashworths before. The words dropped into her like a stone into a well, down and down. The old Duke died of a fall, the family said asterisk. And she saw in his face that he had chosen them, that he was watching them land, that this too was 3 careful drops in a glass. "Thank you for your concern, cousin," said Marian, and her voice, by some miracle of her mother's ghost and her father's blood, came out level as a ledger line. "I know these stairs very well by now, every board of them." She let that sit as he had let his sit. "Good night, Mr. Ashworth. Do not work too late, Ink, I find, always shows more by daylight." She turned her back on him. It took more courage than the whole of the Marlowe ball, and walked away down the dark corridor at an even, unhurried pace, her spine straight, her bare feet silent, feeling his eyes and his lamplight on her back every step of the way to the stairs. Behind her, Reginald stood quite still in the study doorway, and watched the darkness where she had gone, and mentally moved the date on a certain document forward by a fortnight. By morning, he thought, turning back to the desk, to the lamp, to the patient snowfall of signatures. Everything moves up. The letters into her room by Tuesday. Hartwell's people notified by Thursday. She knows. Good, let her know. Knowledge without proof is just fear with better posture, and no one in England believes a frightened woman. The dose changed on Sunday night. No one saw it, no one ever saw it, but if you had held the little brown bottle up to the light on Monday morning, you would have found it emptier by half than 5 drops could explain. Julian returned from London on the Sunday evening looking like a man carried home from a war, gray-faced, hollow-eyed, gripping the stair rail like a rope. And that night and the next, his devoted cousin sat late with him in the study, refilling his glass with his own kind hands, murmuring comfort into the fog. And into that fog, drop by drop, Reginald poured the poison that mattered most, not the brown kind. The spoken kind. You've noticed it too, then. No, cousin, I'll say nothing, it isn't my place. Only that she went out unaccompanied twice in London. Only that the servants talk. Only that Farley, no, forgive me, I've said too much. Farley. He chose the name the way a surgeon chooses where to cut. Young Lord Farley, who had meant no harm at all, that first night at the Pemberton ball, who had clapped Julian on the shoulder and said the 11 words that had been rattling in the Duke's skull for 3 drugged and sleepless months. Whatever did you do to deserve her? Reginald had been standing near enough to hear it said. Reginald forgot nothing. Reginald kept things too, only not the way Mrs. Hobbs kept them. By Wednesday, the Duke of Ashworth was not sleeping at all. By Thursday, his hands shook so badly at breakfast that he could not lift his cup, and the thoughts moved through his head like strangers in a dark house, and every time he closed his eyes he saw his wife laughing in a sea of candlelight with her bare throat shining, and heard Farley's voice, and his father's voice, and could no longer tell with certainty which thoughts were his own. That was the whole art of it, you understand. 10 years of patient chemistry, arriving at last at its purpose. A man so unmade that he would believe what he was shown. On Friday, Reginald showed him. It was done with an old trick, because the old tricks are old for a reason. A maid knew that quarter, hired on Reginald's warm recommendation. A sharp-faced girl named Susan who was paid twice. Once by the house, once by the east wing, came flying down the great staircase on Friday morning in beautifully rehearsed distress, wringing her apron, begging Asterisk to speak to his grace, so sorry, so frightened. But she'd been airing the Duchess's chamber and the floorboard by the window was loose, and she'd only meant to press it flat again, truly, and underneath it. Underneath it, gentlemen, she had found things. They went up in a grim procession, the Duke swaying, Reginald gravely supportive at his elbow, the steward, and behind them, uninvited and unstoppable, Mrs. Hobbs with her ring of keys and her face of stone. And there in the Duchess's own chamber under the pried-up board, wrapped in one of the Duchess's own silk shawls, lay the ruin of Marion Whitlock, arranged by a master. The Ashworth rubies, the great parure necklace, drops, and clasp that had been locked in the strong room since the old Duke's day that Julian himself had never once offered his wife. Stolen, evidently, hidden, evidently, beneath her floor in her shawl in her room. And beneath the rubies, tied with ribbon, a packet of letters. They were masterworks, those letters. The gray man in respectable black had many gifts, and this was the greatest of them. He did not forge handwriting so much as he forged Asterisk Soul's asterisk. The hand was a gentleman's, easy and ardent. The voice was tender, familiar, laughing. The voice of a man replying, and this was the poisoned genius of it, replying to letters from her, so that her own words seemed to hang everywhere between his lines like a scent. You say his coldness no longer wounds you, my brave girl. Wear the green silk on Thursday, and I shall know it is meant for me. Be patient, my heart. Bristol men know how to wait, and so do I. They were signed only F***. Julian stood in his wife's bedchamber with the third letter shaking in his fist, and the fog in his skull caught fire. What happened in the next hour, the servants of Ashworth Hall would speak of in low voices for the rest of their lives. The roar of it reached the kitchens. Doors that had stood open 100 years were slammed until their hinges cracked, and through it all moved Reginald, calming, restraining, managing, the very picture of a man holding a family together, steering his poor mad cousin's hurricane with 3 fingers on the tiller, and never once letting it blow anywhere he had not already charted. They summoned her to the great hall at noon. It was Reginald's choice of room. He wanted staircase and gallery and echo, wanted the servants watching from the doors, wanted it public because a private accusation can be privately withdrawn, and Reginald did not deal in things that could be withdrawn. Marian came down the great staircase into the ambush with her chin level, and her step unhurried. She had known since Susan's first shriek that the day had come, known it the way you know a storm has arrived, not by thought, by pressure. Crossing that cold marble under the eyes of the whole household, she took the measure of the scene in 3 heartbeats as her father had taught her to read a rigged auction, the rubies blazing on the long table like a wound, the letters fanned beside them, Reginald in the supporting role of his life, one steadying hand on the Duke's shoulder, and her husband. Her husband. For one instant, pity nearly buckled her knees after all. Julian stood gripping the table's edge like a man on a pitching deck, and she saw it all in his face at 20 feet, the pinpoint pupils, the sheen of gray sweat, the terrible open confusion of a creature that no longer trusts its own mind and knows it. He is drowning, she thought. They have held his head under for 10 years, and this morning they let him up just long enough to show him this. Madam. His voice was wreckage. He could not look at her. He looked at the letters, at the rubies, at his own white knuckles. You will explain these. I have never seen them before in my life, said Marian clearly so the gallery could hear. Not the jewels which I could not have removed from a strong room whose key I have never held. Not the letters which are addressed to no one, signed by no one, and found by a maid 3 weeks in this house who came recommended by one man in this room. She turned her head, slow and deliberate, and looked at Reginald. You will note, cousin, that I do not weep, and I do not faint. You have built all this for a woman who does both. It is the one error in the workmanship. It was magnificent and it was hopeless, and she had known it would be hopeless before her foot left the last stair. That was the perfection of the trap. Her very steadiness sprang it. A guiltless wife would weep, so her calm was brazenness. Her ledgers with Mrs. Hobbs, ah, madam, but why was a duchess creeping through account books at midnight? Became cunning. Her London errand to a solicitor's office in the city, oh yes, Reginald produced that too, gently, regretfully, she was followed, cousin. I had feared something of this kind, became conspiracy. Every strength she had was reforged in front of her eyes into proof. Reginald had not built a lie. He had built a machine that ate the truth and grew stronger. The North House. Julian's voice, when it finally came, was very quiet, which was worse than the roaring, and he said it with his eyes shut, like a man reciting something learned under the fog, in the long study evenings, from a warm and patient voice. You will go to Hartsmere. Tonight, you will. You will be cared for there until he faltered. The script seemed to slip from him. For one raw half-second his eyes opened and found hers, and something at the very bottom of them, something 10 years old, something standing in a doorway in its nightshirt, looked out at her and *pleaded. And then Reginald's hand tightened kindly on his shoulder, and the something drowned. "Until arrangements can be made," Reginald finished for him, smooth as syrup. "For everyone's peace. Dr. Hartwell's people are so very good with difficult ladies." There it was, spoken aloud at last, softly, in front of 40 witnesses who would all remember only that the family had been kind, not the North House. The North House was only the antechamber. A quiet ruin, a quiet madhouse, a quiet inheritance. And as if the day required one blow more, it was Mrs. Hobbs who brought her the letter from Bristol an hour later, while Marion packed one small trunk with her mother's pearls sewn into the lining. A letter that had been sitting in the hall since morning, its arrival timed by no accident at all. Her father's hand, grown suddenly old. "Some devilry is at work against me, Mari. Barrow's Bank has called in the notes without cause. The exchange will not touch Whitlock paper. 2 cargoes refused at the dock. I have weathered storms before, child, and I will weather this one, but I cannot come to you at present, and it breaks my heart to write it." They had thought of everything. The husband poisoned. The father strangled at a distance of 100 miles by a few whispered words in the right coffee houses. The law, the church, society itself, all doors closed, quietly, one by one, until the only road left in England was the road north to Hartsmere. Knowledge without proof is just fear with better posture. "We shall see, cousin," thought Marion, sewing with small, fierce, perfect stitches. "We shall see what posture is worth." They brought the carriage around at dusk. Reginald was too careful to send her off in daylight, with the whole county's eyes on the road, and the household turned out upon the steps to see the Duchess of Ashworth put away. She came down dressed as if for the Marlowe ball, deep green silk, her mother's pearls at her ears, her cropped head bare and brushed to a shine, gold ribbon and all, and she walked the gauntlet of that silent staircase, past Susan, who could not meet her eyes, past the footman Thomas, who stood at attention with tears running openly down his face and his fists shaking at his seams, past Reginald, waiting at the carriage door itself for the pleasure of it, wearing sorrow the way other men wear about in the air. "A sad day, madam," he murmured, handing her in with perfect courtesy. "But rest meant so much, and Hartsmere is very quiet." He leaned in, adjusting the carriage rug over her knees, solicitous, tender, his voice dropping below the reach of any witness. "You should have wept at the mirror that first morning, Duchess. Weeping women are pitied. Clever ones are put away. It was the hair that told me you'd have to go. The very morning you came down proud, I knew. He broke you wrong, you see." He smiled his real smile and stepped back. He always did do everything wrong. The door began to close. "Mrs. Hobbs," said Marion. The old housekeeper was there, had been there all along, at the carriage's other side, stone-faced in the dusk, ostensibly holding her Grace's traveling case. And in the half-second of the handover, in the shadow between their two bodies, out of every living sightline, Reginald watching the road, the coachman watching his horses, the household watching the wrong door, something small passed from the Duchess's gloved palm into the housekeeper's chapped one, and vanished into that deep apron pocket where, for 45 years, the truth of Ashworth Hall had gone to be kept. Something small, something with a cork. "Safe journey, Your Grace," said Mrs. Hobbs in a voice like a closing gate. "I'll see the house is kept, exactly as it should be, every last bottle of it." Their eyes met for one heartbeat. Neither woman smiled. It was not a moment for smiling, it was a moment for aiming. The whip cracked, the wheels bit gravel, and the carriage bore Marion, Duchess of Ashworth, away down the long dark avenue between the limes, north, into exile, into the teeth of a plan 10 years in the making, stripped of husband, father, home, and name, with winter coming on. Reginald stood on the steps and watched the lamps shrink to sparks, and allowed himself, at long last, the luxury of a deep and satisfied breath. He had won, every piece taken, every file closed. He ran the evening back through his mind the way a craftsman inspects finished work, joint by joint, and found it flawless. Flawless except somewhere at the bottom of his mind, small as a floorboard's creak, the housekeeper's pocket. He had seen nothing. There had been nothing to see. And yet some animal quarter-second of the scene sat wrong with him, the way a single wrong figure sits in a column of thousands, and he stood on the steps a moment longer in the cold, frowning at a dark road, hunting for it. He could not find it. He shrugged and went in to dinner and ordered up the best claret in his cousin's cellar. It was the most expensive shrug of his life. Hartsmere was not a prison. That was the cleverness of it. It was only a house, a low gray stone house on a low gray moor, 140 miles north of anywhere that mattered, with a bog on two sides and weather on the other two. There were no bars on the windows. There was no lock on her door. There was only Mr. and Mrs. Grimshaw, the caretaking couple hired by the estate, which meant hired by Reginald, who were never rude, never cruel, never anything at all except present asterisk. At the foot of the stairs, at the end of the lane, at the post box in the village 3 miles off, where every letter the Duchess of Ashworth wrote was faithfully collected by Mr. Grimshaw's own hands. And never seen again. She understood the arrangement by the end of the first week. She wrote to her father, silence. To Mrs. Hobbs, silence. To Mr. Aldbury, 3 times in increasingly careful language, silence, silence, silence. Either her letters were drowning in Mr. Grimshaw's coat pocket, or the answers were, or both. And the beauty of it, the truly Reginald beauty of it, was that she would never know which, and neither would they. Her father would think his ruined daughter too ashamed to write. Aldbury would think his client had thought better of her suspicions. Mrs. Hobbs would think. No, Marion stood at the cold window, looking at the cold moor. Mrs. Hobbs would not think anything foolish. Mrs. Hobbs had kept a key for 20 years and a letter for 10. Mrs. Hobbs knew how to wait. And so do I, Marion told the moor. So do I. But it is one thing to say it in November. It is another thing in January. The scandal sheets found her even at Hartsmere. The Grimshaws saw to that. It was the one kind of post that was always, unfailingly delivered, left folded by her breakfast plate with the cruelest items uppermost, and Marion read every word with her chin level, because she knew Mrs. Grimshaw was watching her read, and reporting south on how she took it. They had done their work thoroughly, Reginald and his gray man. The Ashworth affair, the papers called it. There was the maid's touching account, poor frightened Susan, of jewels beneath the floor. There were the letters from the mysterious *F*, printed in tender, damning fragments. There was in the filthiest of the sheets a cartoon, a merchant's scales with a ducal coronet on one side and a woman's cropped head on the other, and underneath, short weight, a Bristol bargain. The crop that had conquered London in May was, by December, the mark of Cain. The same hairdresser in Bond Street who had made his fortune off the Ashworth crop now advertised false braids and chignons, for ladies wishing to distance themselves from a certain person. And London, fashionable, laughing, 400-candle London, which had leaned toward her warmth like a crowd in winter, London believed it all. Of course it did. It was such a very good story. The shopkeeper's granddaughter, bought by a coronet, caught with the family rubies under her floorboards and a lover's letters in ribbon. It confirmed everything the drawing rooms had always known about * that kind of person. The old Countess of Marlowe alone, God keep her, was reported to have thrown a scandal sheet into her own fire, and said the only interesting woman in England had been got rid of by the only boring men in it. But the Countess of Marlowe was 70, and it was a long way to march, and even lions grow tired of roaring into silence. Her father wrote once. One letter in February, smuggled, she realized with a lurch of love and terror, sewn inside a parcel of Bristol wool stockings by some dockside friend too humble for Reginald's Webb to have noticed. His hand had grown looser, older. the letters sprawling like a tired man's steps. They have not left me the warehouse cat, Mari. Barrows took the ships. I sleep at your aunt's now and am well enough. Do not fret, but child, I must write what I never thought to write to you. I have heard what they mean to do. Hartwell's men came north before Christmas to look at you. Did you know it? A red-faced man and a thin one at the village inn asking their questions. When the papers are signed, they will come again, and there is not a magistrate in that county who does not dine at Ashworth Hall. I cannot reach you. My name is Mud and my purse is air, and no court would hear a bankrupt against a duke's cousin. I pray you, girl, if ever a door opens, any door, wide or narrow, do not wait for me. Run. Your loving father, who is prouder of you this day than the day you were christened. Marian read it 4 times. Then she burned it because she was her father's daughter and sat by the small mean fire in the small gray parlor and looked into the flames, and with Mrs. Grimshaw safely in the kitchen and no one on earth to see, allowed herself, for the length of one burning letter, to be entirely without hope. They had thought of everything. That was the plain arithmetic of it, and she had never once in her life been able to look away from arithmetic. The men had been asterisked to the village. The papers wanted only signatures, and she had seen with her own eyes how signatures were made at Ashworth Hall. Spring would come, and with it a closed carriage and a red-faced man and a thin one, and after that no letter would ever be smuggled anywhere again, because the letters of madwomen are medical waste. She was 23 years old. Hartwell's people were asterisk so very good with difficult ladies. The fire cracked. The more wind worked at the windows like a patient thief. And Marian Whitlock, because it was Whitlock, not Ashworth, that was left when everything else was stripped away, got up from the chair and took the poker and banked the coals with 2 hard, precise strokes, and spoke aloud in that empty room for the first time in 11 weeks. No, she said, I sent you a bottle, cousin, and bottles keep. It was not hope. Hope is a feeling, and she could not afford feelings until March. It was something older and harder, the thing that had walked her down the staircase in green silk, the thing her mother's 100 strokes and her father's ledgers had built between them, stroke by stroke and figure by figure, 23 years in the making. It was a woman who had checked her own accounts and found one asset still unseized. Mrs. Hobbs, every last bottle of it. Hold, you granite old saint, hold. 140 miles south, on the same February night, the 9th Duke of Ashworth sat alone in his study at 3 in the morning, with a locked drawer open before him, trying to remember his wife's face. He could not. That was the thing the fog took first now, faces. His mother's had gone years ago, worn down to a smell of lavender and a voice counting backwards. His father's, God's mercy, had gone too. And now Marian's. He could summon the green silk, the gold ribbon, the shine of candlelight on a bare proud neck. But the face above it slid away like water whenever he reached for it, and he was reaching for it, these long ruined nights. He could not have said why. She was a thief and an adulteress. There had been jewels, there had been letters. Reginald had explained it all, patiently, more than once, in the study in the evenings over the glass. Reginald explains everything, said a small, cold, buried voice from somewhere far below the fog. Have you noticed? Everything you know because Reginald explained it. His hands were in the drawer. He did not remember opening it. That happened often now, his body arriving in places his mind had not sent it. But this one drawer his body went back to like a dog to a grave, and there in the dark of it, coiled on a folded cloth, lay the braid. Chestnut and heavy, and cool as water when he lifted it, and still, after all these months, holding somewhere in its weight a ghost of the scent of her. He sat there in the guttering candlelight, 31 years old and dying. He did not know he was dying, but the body knows, and the body had begun setting its strange affairs in order. And he held his wife's hair in both ruined, shaking hands, and asked himself the question he had been circling for a season and could never land upon. If she was what they say she was, why did I keep this? A man keeps evidence of a crime. Whose crime, Julian? Hers. Then why, when you hold it, does it feel like yours? Somewhere in the fog behind him, a door he had nailed shut at 10 years old stood ajar, and through it drifted lavender, and a voice counting backwards from 100, and the whisper of scissors and his own small feet, stepping away from her arms, Charlotte. He looked at his father and he stepped away, and Julian, Duke of Ashworth, bowed his head over a coil of chestnut hair and wept, without understanding a single tear of it, the way the drowned must weep, far under the surface, where it changes nothing, and no one will ever see. Then he took up his pen. The fog was rolling in again. He could feel it coming like weather, and while his hand was still briefly his own, he wrote 2 words on a sheet of paper. Not a letter. There was no time and no address he was allowed to know, and no post in that house that did not pass through one pair of soft white hands. Just 2 words, in strokes so heavy they scored through to the desk, as if he meant them to be found under everything else when the house was sorted after, as if he were a man in a sinking ship, sealing a message into a bottle he had no strength left to throw. Forgive. The pen stopped, the fog arrived. And when the footman Thomas brought the morning tray at 8, he found his Grace gray-lipped and senseless on the study floor, one hand pressed flat over a sheet of paper as though holding it down against a wind, and the other closed so hard around a rope of chestnut hair that, as Thomas would one day tell a courtroom in a voice that broke, "We could not open his fingers, sirs. We lifted him and it came with him. We could not make his hand let go." They said afterward it was apoplexy. The new physician said it, a smooth young man, arrived within the very hour, recommended by no one could quite say whom, and he bled the Duke, and shook his head and spoke to the household in the hushed round tones of a man rehearsing for an inquest. His Grace's constitution, long-standing nervous decline. The family has seen it coming, alas. A matter of days now, a week at the most. He should be kept quiet. He should see no one. No one was underlined twice in the instructions pinned to the sick-room door, in Reginald's lovely flowing hand. And the house went dark and hushed, and the servants moved like ghosts, and in the east wing that evening a tailor's man from York sent for by express, measurements taken by candlelight, everything of the very best fitted Mr. Reginald Ashworth for his mourning blacks a full week before there was anyone to mourn. Deep mourning, the tailor noted in his book. Superfine cloth, crepe to the hat, jet buttons. And a duke's coronet, asterisk Reginald did not say aloud, turning before the glass, watching the black settle over his shoulders like a crow folding its wings. But the tailor, stitching by candlelight in the servants' hall that night, would remember until his dying day how the gentleman had smiled at himself in the mirror. Like a man being fitted for a wedding, he told his wife afterward, "I never liked a fit of mine less, and I've buried half of Yorkshire." The house believed it was over. The county believed it. The smooth young physician wrote his notes for the inquest to come, and the fog lay on the sick-room thick as wool, and upstairs a man lay dying with his fingers curled around nothing now. They had taken the braid away. Reginald had seen to that personally, while the law, the church, the College of Physicians, and the calendar itself stood in a ring around his bed with their backs turned. It had taken 10 years, but every account was closed, every road was watched, every door was shut. Every door but one. Because at 11:30 that night, Mrs. Hobbs, the housekeeper, who was too old, too dull, too furniture asterisk to be watched, who had carried keys through that house for 45 years and secrets for 20, who had stood at the foot of the kitchen stairs that evening and heard the smooth young physician laugh, once low, in the east wing where no grieving doctor has any business laughing. Mrs. Hobbs opened the stable's back door with a key that appeared on no ring Reginald had ever counted. Inside, by a shuttered lantern, stood the footman Thomas, white-faced, booted, and 20 years old, holding the bridle of the fastest horse left in the Duke's stables. "You know the North Road, boy. I was born on it, Mrs. Hobbs." "Then ride it." She put into his hands a package wrapped in oilcloth, small and flat, and heavier than paper has any right to be, and gripped his wrists over it with fingers like iron staples. "You stop for nothing and no one. Not magistrates, not weather, not the king. If the horse dies, buy another. If you can't buy one, steal one. God and I will square it after. You put this in her Grace's own 2 hands and none other, and you tell her. And here the granite of 45 years cracked, just once, just wide enough to show what it had been protecting all along. You tell her the Duke is dying. Tell her the Black Crows are already measured and fitted and waiting on the undertaker. And tell her." The old woman's voice went to gravel. "Tell her Mrs. Hobbs kept everything, and it's time." The stable door opened on the freezing dark. Hooves struck the cobbles like flint striking steel, once, twice, and then horse and boy were a single shadow flying down the avenue of bare limes, north, with 140 miles of ice and moonlight before them, carrying the last unclosed account of Ashworth Hall. Behind them, in the great dark house, a clock began striking midnight. Beside a bed in the north, 140 miles away, a woman who could not sleep stood at a black window looking south. And in a fitted suit of superfine mourning, folded now in silver paper in the east wing, jet buttons catching the candlelight, the Crow waited for morning. Thomas made the ride in 19 hours. They would tell it in the tap rooms of the North Road for years, the boy in ducal livery who came through the ice like the king's own courier, who changed horses at Grantham with his hands frozen to the reins, so the ostlers had to pry them loose, who answered every question with the same 4 words: "I ride for the Duchess." He went down twice on black ice in the dark and got up twice, and at 9:30 on the second night, bleeding through one knee of his breeches, he hammered on the door of a low gray house on a low gray moor until the candles woke. Marian knew before her hand touched the latch. All winter she had stood at that black window looking south, waiting for something without a name or a shape, and here it stood on her doorstep, 19 years old and swaying, ice in its hair, holding out an oilcloth package with both raw hands the way an altar boy holds the sacrament. "Your Grace," said Thomas, and his voice cracked on it, "Mrs. Hobbs says it's time." Behind Marian, Mrs. Grimshaw arrived in her nightcap, scandalized, already reciting, "No visitors, madam, strict instructions. The gentleman in London must be written to first." "Write to him then," said Marian without turning around. She stepped aside to let Thomas through to the fire. "And while you write, Mrs. Grimshaw, put down this also and sign it, that I held the Duchess of Ashworth prisoner against her will, having neither warrant, order, nor lawful cause before witnesses." She turned then, and the look on her face was one the caretaker's wife would remember at the hearing and describe badly. "No, nothing to sign. Then stand away from my door, fetch my trunk, and rouse your husband to harness the chaise. I am wanted at my husband's deathbed, and I promise you faithfully, the only person in England with less authority to stop me than you is the man who pays you." They stood away from her door. By the fire, while the chaise was harnessed, Marian opened Mrs. Hobbs's package with steady hands, and found inside it the arsenal of a 45-year war fought entirely with patience. The little corked bottle first, her own sample, taken from the tonic glass with a stolen dropper on her last morning at Ashworth Hall, sealed with candle wax, kept all winter God knew where. Under it, wrapped in flannel, a second bottle, the brown apothecary bottle itself, Dr. E. Marsh, 3 drops nightly, the label, the hand, the curled D and all. He ordered a fresh one from the gray man when his Grace fell senseless, said Mrs. Hobbs's note in her round kitchen script. The old one went in the ash bin. I keep the ash bins, madam. And beneath that Marian's breath stopped, a flat bundle of papers, scorched brown along every edge, smelling of the study fireplace. Page after half-burned page of a single name, practiced over and over in patient rows, each one a little more perfect than the last. Ashworth, Ashworth, Ashworth. He burns his practice sheets every night, the note finished. But a fire wants raking out every morning, and no gentleman has ever once in my 45 years wondered who rakes it. There is 31 £4 in the stocking. It is my savings, and you will not be proud about it. Come home and finish this. E. Hobbs. Marian sat by the fire of her prison with a dead woman's key, a poisoner's bottle, a forger's burnt confession, and a housekeeper's life savings in her lap, and laughed one short, fierce laugh with tears standing in it, at the pure Bristol asterisk bookkeeping of it all. They had watched the Duke, and the Duchess, and the solicitor, and the road. Not one of them had ever thought to watch the woman who raked the ashes. She did not go to Ashworth Hall, not first. Her father's daughter did not spend the last unseized asset in England by galloping at the enemy's strongest gate. She went where the walls were friendly, and the walls she chose belonged to the Countess of Marlow. The old lioness received her at 2 in the morning in a dressing gown and diamonds. She slept in the diamonds, she said, to inconvenience her heirs, heard the whole of it without once interrupting, which those who knew her would have called the greatest tribute of her long life, and then rose and rang the bell with a violence that woke the street. "Sugar of lead," said the Countess grimly, "or I'm a Whig. My second husband's uncle went the same way, the trembling, the colics, the wits going out like street lamps. Well, there is exactly one man in this kingdom whose word on a poison outweighs a duke's cousin, a bought physician, and the whole college put together, and by good fortune he owes me 40 years of whist debts. Simmons, Simmons. My carriage, and send to Harley Street to wake Sir Joseph Fenwick. Tell him Honoria Marlowe says it is more interesting than the king's gout, and to bring his reagents." Sir Joseph Fenwick, physician to 2 kings, a small round man with small round spectacles and the general air of a friendly gooseberry, was very much less friendly by candlelight at 4 in the morning, bent over the Countess's writing table with the little wax-sealed bottle, a spirit lamp, and a rack of glass vessels, while Marian and the Countess and a riveted Mr. Aldbury fetched from his bed by the second carriage. He had arrived carrying the sealed packet from his strong-box and wearing, for the first time in living memory, an expression, watched the liquids in his glasses turn their slow, damning colors. At last Fenwick straightened. "Madam," he said quietly, "in this sample I find sugar of lead in a concentration I should hesitate to give a horse, and beneath it a tincture of something darker that I will name in my written deposition, and not before ladies." Administered nightly, over years, he took off the small round spectacles and polished them, and his hands were not entirely steady. It would produce precisely what all fashionable London has been pleased to call the Ashworth temperament: the rages, the trembling, the confusion, the lost hours. Your Grace, this is not medicine mismanaged. This is murder, conducted at a pace calculated to be mistaken for character. He looked up, and the friendly gooseberry was gone, and what remained had buried kings. "Who prepared this bottle?" "That," said Mr. Aldbury, dry as August, opening the sealed packet and laying the blackmail letter beside the brown bottle so the 2 curled D.S. sat in the candlelight like twin fingerprints, "is what these documents, some 30 affidavits, I intend to collect, and in due course a courtroom will establish. Sir Joseph, can the Duke be saved? If the dosing stops tonight, if he has a constitution left under the wreckage." Fenwick began packing his reagents with the crisp fury of a man handed, late in life, a genuinely unforgivable thing. "Perhaps. Lead loosens its grip slowly, and the leaving is crueler than the staying. There will be weeks of it, and they will be ugly, and he will need day and night nursing by someone who cannot be bought, frightened, or turned away." He looked at the Duchess of Ashworth over the small round spectacles. "I am given to understand, madam, that the present sick-room is guarded by instructions that no one is to enter." Marian rose and picked up her gloves. "Sir Joseph," she said, "I have seen those instructions. They are pinned to the door in a lovely flowing hand." She worked the gloves on, finger by finger, and her voice was Bristol and ledgers and a locked drawer of silver scissors, all of it, every stroke and every figure, 23 years arriving at a single morning. "Bring your reagents. Let us go and correct the punctuation." They came up the avenue of bare limes at 9 o'clock in the morning, in 3 carriages, with the Marlowe Arms on the first. Reginald met them on the steps, of course he did. The east wing had windows, and he was superb. Afterward, even Marian would grant him that. Black already half-mourning, worn anticipatorily with such taste, sorrow in the right places, his voice pitched to carry gently. The poor Duchess, distraught, misled. The poor Duke, past visitors, past hope. The sick-room sealed on doctor's orders. Surely, the Countess would understand that grief must not become disorder. It lasted until Sir Joseph Fenwick stepped down from the second carriage. You could watch the arithmetic happen in Reginald's face. Marian did watch it, and stored it away with everything else. The swift, silent recalculation of a master player finding a piece on the board that outranked everything. The King's own physician, who could not be barred from any sick-room in England without the barring itself becoming evidence. And behind him, a solicitor with a strong box, and behind him, the one dowager in the kingdom whose word could not be bought or laughed at. The smooth young doctor of the sick-room came hurrying out, took one look at the small round spectacles, went the color of his own shirt points, and thereafter contributed nothing to the morning but perspiration. "Cousin," said Reginald at last, gently to Marian, in the voice of a man laying down a losing hand with style, "welcome home. You find us in sorrow." "I find you measured for it, at any rate," said Marian, and walked past him up the steps of her own house, and tore the paper off the sick-room door as she went by. What she found behind that door she would not speak of afterward except once at the hearing when it mattered. The room kept dark, the smell of the sickness, and in the great bed under the crest of his fathers, a gray remnant of a man, 31 years old and weighing what a boy weighs, his breath going in and out like a saw in wet wood, and around one wrist, tied with kitchen string where a rosary might have hung, a single lock of chestnut hair. Not the braid. The braid was gone, confiscated, hidden. Reginald had seen to the braid. This was a thin, poor, stolen wisp of it, tied on clumsily, in secret, by hands that had needed to keep one thread of something and had not been able to say why. Marian stood over her husband, over the man who had shamed her at 40 dinners, who had taken silver scissors to her in the dark, who had believed forged letters against her and sent her north with a word, and watched his ruined breath go in and out, and felt the great wave rise in her one last time. The wave she had put away at the mirror, put away in the blue room, put away all winter on the moor. This time she did not put it away. She let it break. And when it had broken and run all the way through her and drained out, what it left behind on the sand was not tenderness, and it was not forgiveness, and God knew it was not love, not yet, not for a long time yet. It was something prior to all of those, the bedrock they are built on when they are built honestly. No asterisk, she thought. Not like this. Whatever you are, whatever you did, whatever comes after, you will not die in his story. You will live and stand up and answer for your own. She took off her bonnet. She rolled her sleeves to the elbow, in front of Fenwick and the Countess and the frozen household, exactly as a merchant's daughter rolls them when there is work. Thomas, the windows, all of them. This room has been breathing him back his own poison for a month. Mrs. Hobbs, clean linen, beef tea, and every bottle, glass, and paper in this room into a locked hamper. Sir Joseph will want the lot. Susan, the sharp-faced maid, flinched in the doorway like a struck thing. You have 1 hour to decide which side of the coming trial you would rather be witness on. Choose in the kitchen. Out. And for 6 weeks, the Duchess of Ashworth did not leave that room. Fenwick came daily, then weekly, and later wrote that in 50 years of practice he had never seen nursing like it. The woman fought for that man like a creditor. He told the Countess, who laughed until she wept and said it was the truest thing ever spoken of her. The leaving of the lead was every bit as cruel as promised. There were nights of screaming, nights of shaking. A night his heart stuttered and Fenwick was fetched at 3 by a relay of grooms already posted along the road for the purpose, because she had thought of that. She thought of everything now. She ran that sick room the way her father had run a fleet. She fed him with her own hands, beef tea by the spoonful, 1, 2, 3, counting under her breath. And if the counting fell, some nights, without her meaning it, into an old rhythm, 100 strokes by candlelight, that was her own affair and she told no one. And slowly, the way ice leaves a river, groaning in pieces, the fog began to lift off the 9th Duke of Ashworth. It lifted in fragments at first. An hour of clear gray morning here, an evening there, each window a little wider. And through those widening windows, week by week, the man inside was made to look, with a mind unclouded for the first time in 10 years, at the complete accounts of his own life. No one softened the entries for him. Marian would not on principle. She answered every question he found the courage to ask with the plain, flat truth, dates and all, the scissors and the great hall and Hartsmere and all of it, in the level voice of a clerk reading a ledger, and watched him receive, sober, hour by hour and item by item, what he had done under the fog and before it and beneath it, because the fog, as Fenwick confirmed, and as Marian told him without mercy on the first morning he was strong enough to hear it, had only ever loosened what was already in the wood. The poison made you worse, Julian. It did not make you. The scissors were before the worst of it. The scissors were your father's and your hand, and you will not lay them on the lead. He wept that morning the way he had wept over the braid, but above the surface now, where it could be seen, and where it counted. And when it was done, he asked her the question she had been waiting 6 weeks to refuse. Can you ever forgive? No, said Marian, standing, smoothing her apron, entirely calm. Not asterisk ever asterisk yet. Learn the difference, your grace. It is the only lesson I have time to set you, and there is beef tea at 11. She was almost at the door when his voice stopped her, cracked, exhausted, but his own at last, all the way down, for the first time since she had known him. They tell me you had proof enough to hang him a month ago, he said. You could have gone straight to the law and let me die. It would have been justice, and it would have been asterisk easy. Why did you come back? Marian stood with her hand on the door of the room where she had fought all winter for the life of the man who broke her, and gave the question the honest arithmetic it deserved. Because he was going to win, she said simply, and I could not allow it. Get well, Julian, you are my evidence. It should have ended there. Any decent story would have ended there. But cornered animals do not surrender. They change what they are biting. And on the first morning, the Duke of Ashworth walked the length of the rose garden unaided, pale, gaunt, upright, seen asterisk to be upright, by servants and grooms and the visiting Fenwick and half the delighted county. A chaise came up the avenue of limes carrying 2 men in black from London, who presented themselves with every courtesy, and served upon the household the papers that Reginald Ashworth, absent these 5 weeks, devastated by the discovery of an unfortunate criminal servant or 2 in his employ, and now surfacing exactly where the law was deepest, had spent those 5 weeks and the last of 10 years' stolen gold preparing a petition, de lunatico inquirendo, to inquire into the lunacy of Julian, 9th Duke of Ashworth. It was, Aldbury admitted that evening, and from Aldbury it was almost admiration, the perfect final position. Every proof they held told 2 stories now. 10 years of derangement, witnessed by the whole county, is a man sane because he walks in a garden? Recovery. Or is he propped and prompted gentleman by a scheming wife with a fortune to regain and a conviction to escape? The forged signatures. What forgeries is not confusion about one's own signature, the very mark of the condition? The poison itself Reginald would concede, oh, gladly, and lay at the feet of the gray man, the bought doctor, the vanished Susan, servants and hirelings all, whom the poor trusting family had harbored unawares. He was not fighting the evidence any longer. He had stopped defending the board and moved to overturn the table. If Julian is mad, nothing Julian's party proves can stand, and everything lands, gold, duke, and duchess passes into the guardianship of his nearest devoted kin. One hearing, one panel of commissioners in one paneled room in London, 6 weeks hence. Every account of 10 years, the scissors and the letters, the bottle and the burnt signatures, the living and the dead, everything in the end would be carried into that room and weighed at last. Then we had better, said Marian, into the silence of the study where 4 allies and 1 convalescent duke sat looking at the papers, make certain the weighing is done in asterisk public. He wants a quiet room, gentlemen. It is the one thing he has always needed, the quiet. I propose we take it from him. She looked up, and the candlelight caught her cropped head like a laurel on a coin. Mr. Aldbury, how does one invite all of London to a reckoning? Reginald Ashworth had planned for a quiet room. A commission of lunacy was meant to be a discreet affair, a paneled chamber, a few dry commissioners, family council murmuring over medical papers while the world looked politely away. Quiet was the water Reginald swam in. Quiet had built him everything. 10 years of quiet drops, quiet ledgers, quiet letters collected quarterly from a hole in a wall. The Duchess of Ashworth spent 6 weeks taking the quiet away from him. She did it in the open, because the open was her country. The Countess of Marlow gave 3 dinners and told the story at all of them, accurately, which was the devastating part. Fenwick read a paper to the Royal College on the criminal simulation of madness by slow poison that emptied every club in St. James's of conversation for a week. The scandal sheets, scenting a bigger feast than the one they'd eaten in December, turned like a school of fish. The same filthy print that had run asterisk short weight now sold 10,000 copies of a new cartoon, a crow in morning dress, fitted at a tailor's, while through the window behind him a woman in green silk came up the road with a lamp. And on the morning the commission opened, the crowd outside stretched down the street and around the corner, and inside, packed to the walls behind the commissioner's table, sat everyone, from the Marlow box at the Opera transplanted whole, to 3 rows of Bristol merchants in their Sunday blacks who had sailed, walked, and in one case allegedly rode to London to watch Thomas Whitlock's daughter settle accounts. All I ask, gentlemen, Marian had said to Aldbury and the Duke, the night before it began, is that every lie he tells in front of 400 witnesses. Lies are like mushrooms. They only grow in the dark. Yet for all that, and this must be said because it was true, and because Marian herself never afterward pretended otherwise, for the whole of the first day, Reginald winning was not merely possible. It was likely. His counsel, Sergeant Pratt, was the best that 10 years of stolen money could buy, and he built his case like a dry stone wall, no mortar and no gaps. Had the Duke of Ashworth raged, wept, lost hours, forgotten his own signature for 10 years before hundreds of witnesses? He had. The defense itself said so. Very well. Then either his grace was mad, asterisk, or he had been poisoned into the perfect likeness of it, and here Pratt turned gently to the benches. And who, gentlemen, stood to gain by poison? Not my client, who never touched a bottle in that house that 4 servants cannot account for. Consider instead the young wife. Married for her money spent, her ruin published, exiled by her own husband's order. And then observe, The moment his grace lies dying, this same cast-off wife returns, seals herself alone in his sick room for 6 weeks, admits no one but her own hired physician, and produces for us a recovered husband, word perfect, who denounces the one man standing between her and the entire Ashworth estate. He spread his hands. We do not deny a plot, gentlemen. We ask you only to notice who profits from it and who has been nursing the evidence. It was masterly. It was water poured into every crack of the truth. Marian sat through it with her chin level and her hands folded and felt the room, her London, her 400 candles begin, very slightly, to tilt. He has stopped defending the board, asterisk, she thought. He is overturning the table. Very well, cousin. Let us count the legs it stands on. They broke the wall stone by stone, and it took 2 days, and this is how it went. Sir Joseph Fenwick went first, small and round and immovable, and read his deposition in the voice of a man dictating to history. The reagents, the concentrations, asterisk a dose I should hesitate to give a horse. And then, producing the sealed sickroom hamper, the second finding that no one outside the family circle had yet heard. That the restorative cordial pressed on the convalescent Duke by letter, with dear Reginald's anxious compliments during Marian's 6 weeks of nursing, had contained lead in half again the old proportion. The poisoning, gentlemen, did not end when the poisoner left the house. It ended when the Duchess of Ashworth began tasting everything her husband ate or drank in front of witnesses twice a day for 40 days. He polished the small spectacles. I have attended 2 coronations. I have never seen anything so like a food taster of the old dangerous courts, and I never expect to again. Then the tobacconist of Crane Court, blinking in the great room, who knew nothing and understood nothing except that for 10 years a gentleman's man had called quarterly for letters addressed to a Dr. Marsh, who did not exist, and that on the 25th of March last, when the gentleman's man had called as usual, 2 officers had been waiting behind the snuff barrels. Then the gentleman's man himself. They brought the gray man in by the side door, and he came placidly, a lean figure in respectable black with ink-stained fingers, and the whole chamber leaned forward, and Reginald at his counsel's table went for one instant entirely still, like a ledger line struck through. The gray man had weighed his position with professional detachment, forgery of a physician's identity, procurement of poisons, conspiracy, and had found, as such men always find, that loyalty was an asset with no resale value. He testified for 2 hours in a voice like dry paper. The invented doctor, the practiced hand, asterisk backward sloping, sirs, my own device. A man should never blackmail in the hand he banks in the quarterly collections, the letters to order, the replies from F composed to specification, the specification being, sirs, that the lady's own voice should seem to hang between the lines. I was rather proud of those. Asked by the commissioners who had specified, who had paid, who had received 10 years of Dr. Marsh's correspondence, the gray man turned his head unhurriedly and looked at Reginald Ashworth and said, "The gentleman in mourning." Then Susan, the sharp-faced maid who had chosen her side of the trial in the kitchen after all, weeping through the tale of the loose floorboard, the shawl she'd been given already wrapped, the 5 guineas, and the words Mr. Reginald had used. It is only a play, girl, to frighten a thief. Then the tailor of York, mortified and unstoppable, with his order book open to the date. A full week before the Duke's collapse was known to any soul outside the sickroom, asterisk deep mourning, superfine, jet buttons, and his testimony, delivered to his own boots, that he had never liked a fit of his less. The gentleman smiling at the glass that way, sirs, like a man being fitted for a wedding. And then Thomas. He stood very straight in his livery, 20 years old, and told the room about the morning tray and the study floor, and the paper with its 2 scored words, which Aldbury now entered in evidence forgive, and the long wounded dash of a pen losing its owner. And then about the other thing, and here his voice went, and he stopped, and begged the commissioner's pardon, and mastered himself the way the young do, all at once and visibly, and finished. His Grace's hand was closed round her Grace's hair, sirs, the plait of it, what was cut off in the winter, a breath. We could not open his fingers, sirs. We lifted him, and it came with him. We could not make his hand let go. In the fourth row, the Countess of Marlow wept frankly into a lace handkerchief, and she was not alone, and the room had stopped tilting. But it was not one. Pratt was on his feet the moment the boy stepped down, and Pratt was paid to be relentless, touching, all of it most asterisk touching, and not one grain of it proof of sanity. Poisoned men may also be mad. Sentimental men may also be lunatics. The question before the commission was the state of the Duke's mind asterisk now asterisk, and no servant, poisoner, tailor, or weeping dowager could settle that. Only one witness could. The 9th Duke of Ashworth rose from his chair unaided and walked to the witness's place, and the whole chamber heard how quiet 400 people can be. He was gaunt still and grey at the temples now at 32, but he stood level, and his hands on the rail did not tremble, and when he spoke, his voice was low and carried to the last bench, because it was the voice of a man who had stopped defending anything. "I am told the question is whether I am of sound mind," he said. "I will answer it the only way I can. A madman does not know what he has done. I know what I have done. I am going to tell you all of it." And he did. He told it plainly, dates and all, in the level voice of a clerk reading a ledger, and only 2 people in that room knew whose voice he had learned that from. The marriage taken for money and resented for being needed. The empty chair at 40 dinners. The pause before the word asterisk wife asterisk. And then, while London's fans stopped dead and Pratt half rose and thought better of it, the study, the brandy, the silver scissors and the walk down the dark corridor, told step by step, sparing himself nothing. She was asleep, or I believed she was asleep in her own bed in her own home, and I cut off her hair to break her, because my father had taught me on my mother's body that this was how a woman's pride is answered, and because I was a coward and a smaller man than my wife, and I knew it and could not bear it. You have heard I was poisoned, gentlemen. It is true, and Sir Joseph has the science of it, but you will not lay the scissors on the lead. The lead made me worse. It did not make me. I will not leave this rail owning one crime less than my own accounts show. The stillness in that room was of a kind that gets remembered in memoirs. Reginald sat through it unmoving, but those nearest him saw the calculation running and running behind his eyes, and finding, for the first time in 10 years, no next move. His entire final position, nothing the madman's party proves can stand, rested on Julian fighting the word asterisk mad asterisk, on Julian claiming health, wholeness, innocence, so that every admission could be painted as coaching. And instead the man was up there confessing, laying open, unforced in public, wounds that no schemer would ever script and no coached puppet could deliver. And every plain, terrible, sane sentence of it was a stone out of the wall. And then Julian did the thing that Reginald had built 10 years upon the certainty that he would never, ever do. "There is one matter more," said the Duke of Ashworth. "I have paid a man £200 a quarter for 10 years to keep a secret. You have seen the letter. I know what the son did. I am going to tell you what the son did and spend that secret to nothing here in front of everyone where money cannot reach it." At the council table, very slowly, Reginald Ashworth's face lost its last tenet. "The night my father died," said Julian, and his knuckles whitened on the rail, and his voice stayed level, "I quarreled with him. At the head of the great staircase past midnight. He was drunk, and he was speaking of my mother, who was 2 years dead, in terms I will not repeat, and for the first and only time in my life I stood up to him. I told him he had killed her slowly, as certainly as with a blade, and then I walked away down the stairs and out to the stables and rode until dawn. When I came back he was lying at the stairs' foot and had been for hours. He closed his eyes, opened them. I left him raging and drunk at the top of a staircase in the dark, gentlemen, and he died on it. When the first letter came, asking its £200, I know what the son did, I paid it. I have paid it 10 years. Because for 10 years I have believed the son did do it, that my 1 hour of courage killed my father. And I would have paid it out of hell's own strongbox rather than hear it said aloud. He looked up and found his wife's face in the crowded room. He could remember it now. The fog was gone. He had it by heart, every line, and finished to her, though the words were for the commissioners. I am done paying. Say what I am. But whatever the word is, I earned every part of it awake. And in the silence after, before Pratt could gather himself, before the commissioners could confer, a voice spoke from the back of the chamber that was not on any list for that day, a voice like a closing gate, from a small stone figure in decent black who had sat unnoticed through everything, because she had spent 45 years being unnoticed, and it was the last time she would ever need the skill. "Beg pardon, sirs," said Mrs. Hobbs, "but His Grace has his accounts wrong, and I'm the only one living who can correct the entry." They swore her, because the Countess of Marlow said in a carrying whisper that if they did not, she would, and the old housekeeper stood where the Duke had stood, with her hands folded on her apron as if it were any Tuesday, and put down, at last, what she had carried longest. 45 years in that house, sirs. I was on the back stairs that night, the servant's stair that comes out by the long gallery, heard the quarrel like His Grace says, heard him go, and I'll tell you what His Grace couldn't see going. His father stood at the top of those stairs a full quarter hour after, alive as any man in this room, holding the rail and cursing the dark. Her eyes went, flat and unhurried, across the chamber. He wasn't alone, sirs. Mr. Reginald came up the gallery to him. I heard them speak money, it was always money. The old Duke had found something wrong in the accounts that week. He'd said so at table, said there'd be a reckoning of it come Monday. There was no Monday. I heard the old Duke's voice go up. I heard a scuffle of feet on the boards, 2 men's feet, sirs, close together, and then I heard the fall, all the way down. A sound I've heard every night since, 45 years a Christian woman, and I'll hear it tonight. The chamber did not breathe. And then, sirs, said Mrs. Hobbs, I heard the one thing I could never make speak, all these years, me being a servant and him being family, and no letter in my apron then to make anyone believe me. I heard footsteps come down the great stairs after, slow, sirs, easy, no hurry in them at all. I heard them stop at the bottom, where a man would have to step past what was lying there, and I heard them walk away to the east wing, and a door close, soft. And no alarm raised in that house till the scullery girl screamed at 6. She turned her head and looked at Reginald Ashworth across 45 years, and her voice never rose at all, which was why no one who heard it ever forgot it. You'd have done better to look behind you on the gallery, sir. But then, your sort never does think to look at us. We're the ones that rake the ashes. What happened next happened quickly, as such things do. Reginald was on his feet, and it was the standing that finished him. Everyone said so afterward. Innocent sits still and outraged, and he stood fast with his eyes on the side door, and the side door opened before he reached it, because Aldbury, who anticipated everything, had spent the morning's testimony quietly conveying the grey man's sworn confession to 2 waiting officers and a magistrate, and the warrants, forgery, conspiracy, administration of poison, had been signed an hour before. They took him at the door, in front of 400 witnesses in his beautiful superfine blacks, and the last London ever saw of Reginald Ashworth as a free man was the Crow, pinioned between 2 constables, turning back toward the room with the mask finally, wholly gone, and finding, in all that sea of faces, the one he could not stop himself from seeking. Marian looked back at him, level, unhurried, chin exactly where her mother's 100 strokes had set it. You should have wept at the mirror, he had told her once. She did not weep now either. She took out a small notebook and made, deliberately, while he watched, a single neat stroke in it, like a woman closing an entry, and put it away. The commissioners were out for 11 minutes. The petition was dismissed. The 9th Duke of Ashworth was declared of entirely sound mind, sounder, the senior commissioner added, in the one judicial joke of his career, than this commission has been accustomed to find in persons never inquired upon at all. And the room came up like a wave, hats and handkerchiefs and Bristol voices roaring, and the Countess of Marlow was heard to declare that she had not enjoyed herself so much since the Regent split his coat. But the papers the next morning did not lead with the verdict, nor the arrest, nor even the housekeeper. They led with what happened in the emptying chamber after witnessed by half of London, confirmed by all of it, denied by no one. The Duke of Ashworth crossed the floor to his wife through the crowd, and the crowd fell back, sensing weather. And there, in daylight, in public, in the sight of every rank and sheet and eye in England, the 9th Duke of Ashworth went down on his knees to a merchant's daughter, and stayed down. "You once told me," he said, and he did not lower his voice, and 400 people stopped pretending not to listen, "that everything I broke in the dark, in corridors, behind doors, while you slept." He took a breath. "Then let me be repaired where everyone can watch. I do not ask you to come home, madam. The house is yours, and I will lodge at an inn until you say otherwise if it is years. I ask only leave to court my own wife. From the beginning, from nothing. Calls on Tuesdays if you permit, flowers if you permit, refusal as often as you please for as long as you please in public where it can cost me properly." He looked up at her, gray-templed, kneeling on stone, sane, and there, before all of them, said the two words the pen had lost: "Forgive me, not today, but leave the account open." The silence stretched 5 seconds, 10, while Marian, Duchess of Ashworth, looked down at the kneeling wreck and rebuilding of her husband, and all London held its breath on her answer. "Tuesdays," she said at last, "are acceptable." And then, because she was her mother's daughter too, and somewhere under the ledgers had always known it, she added, in a voice only he was meant to hear, though the Countess of Marlow later swore on her diamonds she caught every word, "Bring hyacinths. I am told they mean I am sorry, and you will be saying it for a very long time." He courted her for 11 months. London had never seen anything like it, and London saw all of it, which was the sentence and the point. The Duke of Ashworth calling on his own wife on Tuesdays like a nervous suitor of 20. The Duke refused at the door twice in October alone, and going quietly back to his inn. The hyacinths, every week, in and out of season, at a cost the flower women of Covent Garden discussed with reverence. He sold the London house to repay her father. Whitlock & Co. flew again by summer. Bristol saw to that, and signed, unasked, before Aldbury, papers settling her fortune on herself alone, beyond any husband's reach, his own included. He reopened the Blue Room and read the letters, all of them, and had his mother's portrait cleaned and hung at the head of the great staircase, where his father's had been. And slowly, the way ice leaves a river, Tuesdays became also Thursdays, and Thursdays walks in the rose garden, and the walks grew longer as the evenings did, until an evening in the following spring when the Duchess of Ashworth, pruning roses in the garden her mother-in-law had planted, informed her husband, in the level voice of a woman reading a ledger line she had checked 3 times and found at last correct, that the inn was a foolish expense, that the account was open, and that he might come home. He wept. She let him. There was a great deal of that year in it, and a great deal of 30 years before it, and she had learned from a locked room full of unsent letters the cost of tears that are never allowed out. Then she handed him the pruning knife, and set him to work beside her among his mother's roses, because that was what forgiveness was in the country where Marian kept her heart. Not a feeling, but an account faithfully serviced daily, in small installments in daylight forever. 3 springs later, the rose gardens of Ashworth Hall came into bloom a week early, and the head gardener, there were 12 gardeners again now, and the chimneys drew clean, and the butcher of the village had named his new prize bull His Grace out of pure solvency and affection, declared it the finest year for roses since the old duchess planted them. Both of the old duchess's rooms stood open now. The blue room's black oak door had been the first thing changed, 3 years ago in the week after the hearing. The room was a morning room now, full of south light, with the work basket mended and the embroidery hoop framed on the wall, rose half-finished forever, the way some things are allowed to be. The letters to Charlotte lived in a rosewood box on the mantel, all of them finally, gently *read, and beneath the portrait of the gentle-eyed duchess that now hung at the head of the great staircase, a small brass plate said nothing about wasting fevers. It said, she kept him gentle. It cost her everything. It was not wasted. Julian had written those words himself, and it had taken him 4 months, and Marian had not helped him with a single one, because some accounts a man must settle in his own hand. On this particular May evening, in the golden hour, the Duchess of Ashworth sat by the open window of that morning room with her daughter on a footstool before her, brushing the child's hair. The Lady Honoria Ashworth was 2.5 years old, chestnut-headed, and conducting the evening's negotiations with all the diplomatic subtlety of her godmother and namesake. The Countess of Marlowe having been so insufferably delighted by the christening that she had settled her second-best diamonds on the child immediately. To inconvenience, she announced radiantly, an entirely new generation of my heirs. More, commanded Lady Honoria. We are at 62, said her mother gravely, brushing. A lady finishes her 100 or the counting means nothing. 63. Grandpapa says you count everything. Grandpapa, said Marian, is a man who once made me re-add a column of figures 11 times in a cold warehouse in January, and he may keep his observations to himself. 64. Though in fairness to Grandpapa, who was at that moment down at the stables, teaching Thomas the butler's small son to whittle a boat, having arrived Tuesday for a week and stayed, as usual, for the foreseeable, the observation was fair. She did count everything. She counted the strokes of the brush the way her mother had counted them for her, 100 by candlelight. She counted the hyacinths that still arrived every single week, in and out of season, 3 years past any obligation, because her husband had never once permitted himself to consider the account closed. She had counted, that very morning, the 4th anniversary of a Tuesday on which a kneeling man had been told that Tuesdays were acceptable. And she wore on her left wrist, where the whole world could see it, the thing she counted dearest. It was a bracelet, the fashion of the age, though none in England had a history like this one. A woven band of chestnut hair, plated fine as watch chain by the best hair worker in London, clasped in gold. The jeweler had wanted to set it with pearls. Marian had refused the pearls and dictated the clasps engraving herself, and the jeweler, reading it, had asked no questions, which is how he came to be the jeweler to the Duchess of Ashworth for the rest of his career. The braid it was woven from had spent one winter in a locked drawer, and one terrible morning gripped in a dying man's hand that would not let go. She had asked for it herself. That was the part London never knew, the part that belonged to the two of them only. A year into the courtship, on a Thursday walk, Julian had confessed in a voice like breaking ice that he still had it, that he had taken it back from the constable's inventory of Reginald's confiscated things. He kept it, Marian, in a strong box with the deeds. He kept everything he took from everyone like receipts, and that he did not know what a man was supposed to do with such an object. Burn it, bury it, be sentenced by it. He had stood there in the rose garden, holding the last evidence of the worst thing he had ever done, waiting for her to tell him. Give it to me, Marian had said. It was always mine. And then, because she had had a year to think and was her father's daughter to the last. You meant it for a trophy, and then you kept it for a wound. It has been evidence long enough. I intend to have it made into something asterisk useful, and you will pay the jeweler's bill, Julian, and it will not be small, and you will be glad of every shilling." The engraving inside the clasp, where it lay warm against her pulse, said, "Cut in darkness, kept in sorrow, worn in daylight." Her own hair had grown back long since, of course. She wore it to her shoulders and no further, cut fresh every season, by her own instruction, while fashionable London, which had gone back to chignons years ago, periodically rediscovered the Ashworth crop and attributed it to whichever French actress was newest. Marian let them. She knew what the length was. It was the exact span between what had been done to her and what she had done with it, and she measured it in the mirror every morning the way a merchant reads the waterline of a ship coming home loaded. This much, and no more, and all of it mine. 99, she counted now as the light went amber, and 100. There, bed for you, miss. Papa first, said Honoria, with the certainty of a creature who has never once been wrong about this, and turned toward the doorway. He was there, of course. He was always there by the 100th stroke. The Duke of Ashworth stood in the doorway of his mother's morning room with his shoulder against the frame, watching, as he watched every evening he was at home, and he was almost always at home. He was 32 and looked 40, gray at the temples for good. The lead had kept that much, Fenwick said, as its exit fee. Reginald was 4 years into a lifetime beyond the sea, and wrote sometimes letters of injured elegance that Aldbury filed unanswered. The grey man had vanished into whatever fog such men are issued at the end. Susan was in service in Scotland under another name, doing well, which Marian knew because Marian had arranged it, and no one else knew because that was also Marian. And Julian stood in doorways. He had told her why once, only once, in the dark, in the plain flat voice they kept for the true entries. A boy stood in a doorway in this house and watched it done and said nothing and stepped away. I stand in them now on purpose. Every evening that I stand there and watch you brush her hair and want nothing on this earth changed, I am telling him, that boy, how it was supposed to look. I am correcting the entry. Honoria launched herself at him. He caught her the way he caught her every night, as though she were both entirely sturdy and infinitely breakable, which was, he had learned at extraordinary cost, the correct way to hold every precious thing. And over her small chestnut head, across the golden room, his eyes found his wife's. Marian looked back at him, unhurried, chin level, the brush still in her hand and the woven bracelet warm on her wrist, and allowed him, because the account was open, and faithfully serviced daily in small installments in daylight, the whole of what her face did next. "Well then," she said, "and if you had told the woman at the mirror on that jagged-haired morning 4 years ago that the words would ever come to mean asterisk this, the amber light, the counted strokes, the man in the doorway learning nightly how it was supposed to look, she would not have believed you. But she would have written it down, all the same, in the notebook, in her small, firm hand. Marian recorded everything. It was the family joke and the family scripture, and one day it would be Honoria's inheritance, that notebook, more than the diamonds and the dukedom together. The complete, audited, unfalsified accounts of how her mother and father came to love each other. Every debit entered, nothing hidden, and the balance at the last brought honestly home. He had crept into her room with silver scissors, that black midnight long ago, meaning to break her. Instead, though it would take him years and a poison and a courtroom and 11 months of Tuesdays to understand his own night's work, he had woken the woman who would save his life, redeem his name, and teach him, stroke by counted stroke in daylight, what love actually was. Some men are destroyed by their worst act. He was the rarer kind in the end, rebuilt by the woman who survived it, and wise enough ever after to know exactly whom he owed. The candle burned, the strokes were counted, And in the great house of Ashworth, where two women had once wept unheard behind locked doors, a child fell asleep to the sound of her parents laughing quietly together, somewhere down the lit and open hall. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.